This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Three minutes after 10, and good morning. It's only a little radio show. What was it? Was it Brian Conley? It's only a game show. Was that Brian Conley, one of his characters? I forget. But it's only not as little as it used to be. But I do sometimes feel a vague sense of responsibility, particularly when I catch myself not wanting to talk about things that are obviously quite important because they are, tricky conversations. I don't enjoy talking to sort of ranting racists. I used to love it. I mean, in many ways, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for all the ranting racists that used to ring me up. But I'm not sure you'd change any minds particularly, or butter any parsnips. And it's a lifestyle choice, isn't it, to spend your life dedicated to despising foreigners in general and people who've arrived here in life-threatening circumstances in particular. It's an invitation that has been made very clearly by Downing Street in the last couple of years. I mean, arguably for the last 13 years. But since the small boats became a major news story, people like Suella Braverman and Priti Patel in particular have strained every sinew to turn us into a nation of chomping, ignorant xenophobes. And, it's a living. Their calculation is it's a puppet. It's a game show. Where does it's a game show come from? It's only a game show? It's only a game show? I don't know. Anyway, apologies to Brian Conley. It's a puppet. He was doing a sort of children's television character, wasn't he? Well, that started well. 4 minutes after 10. One massive misstep already in the bag. And I don't like doing it because I haven't really found a way to conduct these conversations that doesn't in some way inflate the hate. Inflate the hate. You should not inflate the hate. Don't inflate the hate, kids. I don't know how you do it. How do you have this conversation? Already there'll be people listening who are furious and they're not quite sure why, but they're just shouting something about fighting age men and all sorts of other nonsense. There'll be other people listening who just feel their hearts sink at the thought of another conversation about humans being dehumanized. But I think sometimes you have to. So today we will. I need your help, though. And that's where the sense of responsibility rather pompously comes in, because there are so few voices in the UK media that don't sign up pretty much wholesale to the absolute demonisation and dehumanisation. Listen, if you think I'm exaggerating, go and count how many children are still missing from asylum processing centres and then double check how often you've heard it mentioned in corners of the British media that are routinely dedicated to trying to scare the bejesus out of you with tales of foreign people coming here with foreign ideas. Just go and check. Missing children versus newspaper coverage. So today's story is an odd one, really. Deporting each human to Rwanda will cost taxpayers around £169,000 a pop. If you were to remain in this country for 4 years, the Home Office's own analysis is that would cost around £106,000. Of course, if these poor people were permitted to work, which almost all of them would like to do, because the thing about racists shouting fighting age is they're too thick to realise that is a synonym for working age. So quite why they shout fighting age men is a question that they'd have to answer. But of course, working age men is a rather different proposition, or indeed working age women. So plenty of people, plenty of job vacancies could conceivably be filled. Nowhere near enough to make a massive difference to the overall picture, because the number of people having their applications processed is, in the great scheme of things, relatively small. Last year, 45,755 people arrived via dangerous means, unsafe means, partly, of course, because there aren't any safe routes. But the idea of spending £169,000 to, quotes, send them back, end quotes, which has, of course, been a policy of the far right since the days of Enoch Powell and the National Front, send them back where they came from, is just one of those moments where you find yourself thinking, what's going on? What is going on? There is a consensus emerging that it was from the Big Break game show that someone shouted, "It's only a game show." That was a snooker-based game show featuring Jim Davidson, I believe, and John Virgo. So there you go. You live and learn. Younger listeners have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. So 8 minutes after 10 is the time. I don't know how to do this. I don't think it might turn into a what do you think of this proposal? What do you think of this story? £169,000 a pop. Does that represent good value for money to you, or does that represent a ridiculous rip-off? Money well spent? I don't think that's very interesting. Also, with the greatest of respect, there's not much point asking you what the solution to this problem would be. Is there? I've got no more idea than I've got. And, Dorries in Ongar telling us that we should, fit Stanley knives to the RNLI lifeboats so that they can puncture them before they get here. It might be quite entertaining radio, but it overlooks two things. Number two, there could be meaningful solutions to these issues. And number one, we're talking about human beings. I don't know why I did that in reverse order either, actually. It just came out that way. But no one else does. You'd never go number two. There are two reasons why we should do this. Number two, blah, 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 blah. And number one, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, we've done it now. So I think we're going to play camps. Do you want to play camps? It's not sort of, shut that door. It's more, what camp are you in? And it doesn't even have to be what camp are you in. It just has to be, can we just make a list of possible responses to this story? Is that a silly idea? Will you be able to get inside the mind of somebody else? Maybe it is a silly idea. Because what I mean by that is, here is what I think, okay? Here is what I think. We should have a good look at what sort of numbers are being accommodated from the world's most dangerous places by comparable geographic and economic nations. And when you do that, we are, even with these numbers here, we're not top of the tree. So let's just say, leave the numbers roughly where they are, and we should do our bit, okay? I know there's a lot of lies out there about us doing more. There's a widespread perception, probably because our right-wing media spends so long wanging on about it. There's a widespread perception that we somehow do much more than other countries do. There's also a widespread perception that we're somehow a soft touch, or that, as that bloke on Question Time said the other day, people get off the boats and go straight to the benefits office, which is just untrue. It's not even an opinion. It's like claiming that the moon is made of cheese. It's complete nonsense. But, of course, on the BBC, you can still say these things, not just as a Question Time audience member, but also as a booked guest on discussion programmes. So that's where I begin, okay? I would like to live in a country that did more than the average, but I accept that that is a personal opinion and politically difficult. So let's just say we find the rough average number of refugees, number of asylum applications processed, and we stick roughly to that number, right? And then you find a way, because these people are not locked up, despite the wishes of some members of the government. These people aren't locked up. So why can't they find some form of work? Why can't they work? And then the £106,000 to accommodate and support these humans while they're in the UK over an average 4-year period. Obviously, it'd be nice to reduce that number and get the applications processed much quicker. Then you just decimate that number. You'd probably end up running a net profit. But that would be a disaster, wouldn't it? Because even in the run-up to Brexit, immigration in general created a net profit for the United Kingdom. People who had come here from overseas, when you added it all up, put more into the economy than they took out, largely because the biggest drain on the economy, and I don't mean drain in a negative way, it's an earned benefit, is old age pensioners. So if these people became a net benefit to the economy, I guess all the politics would fall apart, would it? It's 12 minutes after 10. So there's the story. I think that camps idea is too complicated, isn't it? I've set out my stall. I'd like to ask you. It's a question I've wanted to ask you for years. Actually, let's do that today. Let's do that today. All right. 12 minutes after 10. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Can you imagine a country in which this stops being such a live issue? 0345 6060 I was reading what Elton John wrote about homophobia, particularly on The Sun, in the 80s when Kelvin Mackenzie was editor. And in his autobiography, Elton John writes about I mean, it is almost beyond belief how vicious the homophobia was in that era. Even the Sunday Times was running stories about how HIV wasn't caused by the AIDS wasn't caused by the HIV virus. I just look at that moral progress, and one thing I've learned in recent years is that no progress is permanent. There's no such thing as permanent progress. Anything can always go backwards. I think Roe versus Wade in America is probably the best recent example of that. Liberal people can never take any progress for granted. You can see that they're trying to burn books and ban history in parts of America at the moment. There are plenty of people in this country that would like to do the same. They had their own conference a few weeks ago where one fellow stood up and talked about how the Germans had mucked up nationalism, which is a fairly chilling observation. So these people are always there, just bubbling under the surface, waiting for an opportunity. But you can do progress. So when you look at the shift the country has made from the homophobia of the 1980s and the way that someone like Elton John was treated then compared to how he was treated at Glastonbury on Sunday night, you can imagine perhaps a country in which headlines like this, deportations to cost £169,000 each, would cease to resonate in the way that they do now. So rather than asking you how would you solve the problem of human beings trying to come here via very unsafe routes, I think I'm going to ask you, how do you solve the problem of politics and media combining to portray these people as subhuman? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Can you imagine a UK in which the right-wing media and right-wing politicians haven't or don't resort daily to trying to turn you against foreigners? Because it just moves, doesn't it? They're always foreign. It just moves. The spotlight moves. You know, you voted Brexit to send them back where they came from, and then they went back, so the government had to sort of dishonestly and secretly invite lots of people to come here from other countries. The number of visas in agriculture and hospitality and the NHS, all of them being issued now on record levels. Net migration, the highest it's ever been. So they used it to get the Brexit vote over the line or to get a Tory victory in a general election. Vote for us and we'll hurt the foreigners, they say, in terms. And then you vote for them, and strangely, the foreigners are still here. They're still coming here. They're just coming via a slightly different route. So we're not cross with Polish lorry drivers anymore or Romanian builders. We're cross with Syrian refugees or Afghan asylum seekers. And now they're the problem. You can see this coming a mile off when Farage started heading to Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars and posting his funny little films. It's just, well, we've got to find something else now. We've got Brexit over the line. That hasn't improved anybody's life by making life harder for foreigners. So now we've got to find some other foreigners to abuse and demonise and dehumanise in the hope that we'll get these people to follow us over another cliff. And they're, oh, here's some coming in a boat. Let's take some pictures of them and get people really cross and furious. So there it is. It works. Will it ever not work? 0345 6060 973. How would you solve the problem of coverage of people coming here in small boats? How could we turn it into a country where people who haven't got much don't blame people who've got even less for their woes? And because that's a characteristically convoluted question, I just give me straight up responses to this story as well. So, you know, it costs so much, we can't afford it, send them back where they came from. That'll be £169,000 each, please. How do you process that information? So the convoluted question this morning, I like to do a convoluted question and a simple question. So the convoluted question this morning is how do we become a country where these stories are not routinely appearing with the express intent of making us all furious with each other and, of course, really, really furious with foreigners? And question number two, wherever you sit on this question, however furious they have managed to make you. What do you think about £169,000 a pop to send back people whose well, that's not even applications who failed. So that, of course, is people who may well be bona fide refugees, probably are, given the usual application success rate, sending them to Rwanda at a cost of 100. Yeah, it's just nuts, right? Anyway, that's enough from me. Let's find out what you think.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 10, and also I think why does it work? Is it still working like it used to? My sense is that it isn't. 45,550 people came here via unsafe routes last year. Barely a drop in the ocean, if you pardon the pun, of the work vacancies that we have, the labour shortages that we have in this country. Is it working like it used to? And how does it work? If you're unhappy with your lot, how does the invitation from people with loads to blame people with nothing for your situation, how does it prove so successful through the ages? David's in Bristol to kick things off. David, what would you like to say?
Yeah, James, good morning.
Hello,
I
mate.
just speaking to your, your
Producer
there.
Yeah,
Excuse me,
that's all right.
nerves.
That's okay.
It was interesting to be asked. What do you think of your question about the money? And for me, it made me think about who's.
Hang on a minute. What do you mean? What do you think I am? Chopped liver? I've been asking that question all morning. What do you mean it was interesting to be asked it by the producer? They're just regurgitating what I've done.
She reminded me, I should say.
Fair
I
enough.
think that it's a large sum of money, and
Yes.
it adds up over a large sum of people. And you wonder, without being conspiratorial, there's always someone to gain. There's always something to gain for someone along the way.
Yes.
We found this with our prison systems. You can look to other countries who have privatised I invert in commas say that the care of vulnerable people.
Yes.
I find that with my sister who has Down syndrome,
Yes.
the privatisation of care and the looking after of vulnerable people.
National scandal.
It can one after the other, and this is not only the problem with it, but it's what we walk towards as well with these vulnerable people. We're a nation of carers. We're a nation that has always accepted. We're a nation born of immigration. No one landed on this earth until we walked onto it, and it's a right for everyone to be able to have a place to be safe. And I mean that, without being leftist. I think we're a country that had those values.
Are you sure? I'm not sure.
I'm
not sure we did. I think.
Well,
I think it's.
I do know my uncle was a National Front member, and
Really?
he had a very, very different. A Christmas dinner was ruined because of our discussion about where we stood on those points. But I think more generally, interesting. I said to your producer, there was a poll out in the Guardian. I think they said that about 27% of people who had voted for Brexit were now starting to think, was this a bad idea?
Yeah,
Imagine
some of them.
27% of those people are starting to think, hang on a minute, we could be doing better than what we're doing.
You're jumping
And like
around.
you say-
But I'm going to do a touch of the pot kettle black now, David.
Yeah,
which
go on.
would upset your uncle, of course. But I'm just going to try and steer you back to the central question, which is not about Brexit, although you can't really talk about immigration. But just this.
Sorry to bring that up.
What this figure here? How do we become a country where this sort of red meat is just left to fester on the table rather than gobbled up by so many people in politics and my profession?
Well, I think it's like plurality for one. We need a wider breadth of discussion. If I want a discussion like this, there's not many places I can go to and have a clear, defined discussion with someone.
No.
If you turn the page, or you turn the TV over, or you stream and you flick through the scrolling, you won't find that controlled moment to have.
And you
that
never
discussion.
see the word in a headline, do you? You'll never see sort of Somalian
look what someone
doctor.
done for us today. Look, we've had 50,000 nurses that we needed to come today.
Yes.
I bet that never happened in the 60s either. Do you know what I mean? And it should have done. And Windrush is another thing altogether. But we know how badly we've handled immigration and how badly we can handle it and how bad it works out in the future. Windrush is a prime example.
Well,
of
it
that.
is, and of course, people that were desperately needed then treated in, as we heard earlier this week, or beg your pardon, we heard last week on the 75th anniversary, treated often appallingly, that's why the question is timeless, and it's why I was not as optimistic as you about some golden age when we were much more open to this, because it works, and if there's one theme from all the years I've been doing this job that intrigues and upsets me the most, it's watching people fall for it. It works. It works like a treat. It's dragged us out of the European Union. It's divided families, as David has just reminded us. It's probably the biggest engine of right-wing media. Here's a foreigner, hate him. Why? I don't know, but grrr. And it works. 0345 60973. £169,000. That's where the political rhetoric has taken us. People come in here with next to nothing, costing the United Kingdom £169,000 to send them to a country where they don't want to go to, even if they are genuine refugees and asylum. I mean, it's insane. People don't understand this. Ian Duncan Smith, I'm not using him as an example of someone intelligent. I'm using him as an example of someone who was publicly endorsing the policy. He found out live on air that even people whose applications are successful have to stay in Rwanda. I can't believe I'm saying these words out loud, but it gets so normalised, doesn't it? It gets so completely normalised. That's what gaslighting is. I think David's right to that point 10 years ago. Yeah, we're going to spend £169,000 to send genuine refugees to Africa when they won't be able to leave. They certainly won't be able to come back here, and it's £169,000 a pop, even if they are, fleeing the Taliban. Wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. That's the frog boiling element of it all. Chet's in Leicester. Chet, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so I was telling the producer, I think it's the words of Tony Blair, education, education, education.
Yes.
If you educate people, I'm going to talk about children from a young age,
Of course.
the benefits of immigration. And the clear example is the richest country in the world that everybody kind of looks up to, as in to become like, is like the United States of America, which is built on immigration. And if you
They're
look
not
at Australia,
they're not exactly
everybody-
free from problems of racism, are they?
No. I'm not talking. I'm talking economically. And Australia's in fashion with the point system. Again, a country built on immigration. So I think,
But also a country that has even more unpleasant immigration policies than we have. I don't want to rain on your parade, but you could have picked better examples.
No. I'm on about economically. So I'm talking about.
Yeah, but I'm not.
countries
I'm
that
not
are-
on about economically. I'm on about how people are treated. And Australia is a country where the immigration question is even more toxic than it is here.
Yes, but I'm talking about the advantages of immigration and how it helps a
But
country.
it hasn't worked in
And
Australia, has it?
Well, I'm pretty sure.
They're even more opposed and exercised by small boats than we are. You've got people in Australia who are in offshore processing centres who've been there for, I think, decades, or certainly years and years and years.
Yeah,
But I take your
pretty
point, where you need to point to the economic benefits, but you don't need to go to America or Australia to do that, Chet. You could just go to Leicester, where you are.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you mean exactly? I've just undone your point and given you a better one, and you've gone exactly.
No, you haven't undone my point.
I have undone your point.
What I'm saying to you is, it's a bit ironic, but this is getting off the subject, where people who are so upset about immigration in Australia are all immigrants themselves.
Yes, well, I know, but you brought Australia up, not me. I'd have been happier talking about Leicester, and that I think is the point. I always feel that there is. It's not quite on the tip of your tongue. Is there a figure of speech for it just being out of reach? You can't quite. It's almost there. The conversation we had last month about how people who weren't born here feel when they hear the word migrant in the news was one of the best we've had in a very, very long time. Even after all these years, we stumble upon questions that we've never asked each other before, and the responses, the results can be quite extraordinary. And it's empathy, isn't it? You have to suddenly pause and imagine what it would be like to be somebody else, because I was born here. I don't know what it would be like not to be born here. And you hear the word migrant, you hear the way it's been loaded now by media and politicians, and they would say, oh, we don't mean you. So this story here, deporting each migrant to Rwanda will cost taxpayers around £169,000. There's a child in the back of a car somewhere this morning, hearing that on the way to school, who says to their dad or their mum, says, Mummy, you're a migrant, aren't you? What the hell is Mummy supposed to say? Oh, yes, but no, they don't mean me, darling. But I just heard on the radio, deporting each migrant. They're going to deport you to Rwanda? No. But they said migrant, Mummy. You're a migrant. You came here from somewhere else. And that is what we're addressing. If you can somehow knit that together, the fact that everyone would go, oh, no, I don't mean you. somehow knit it to, well, you shouldn't really mean them either. Oh, look, here's a criminal. Let's use him as an example of everybody who's come here from overseas. Well, why would you use him and not, I don't know, Mo Farah? Why would you use that negative example? Why do you put the nationality or the refugee status in the headline when they've done something bad, but not when they've done something good? It's not accidental, is it? £169,000 a pop to bring about Suella Braverman's fever dream. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
This is LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
I've had an idea, Keith. I want to do Dorries Watch. So I want to count the days every day. I want to announce how many days it is since Nadine Dorries announced that she was going to be resigning as an MP with, and I quote, immediate effect. Which, because other MPs resigned more or less on the same day, and they did actually resign with immediate effect, but she still hasn't resigned. So can we do some production on this? What do you think would work? Or should we just start it anyway? Should we just go rogue? Should we go guerrilla? How many days is it? It's got to be about 15 or 16 or 17 days, has it? Is anyone keeping count? Wait there a sec, I'll look it up. What about a TikTok sound, Keith? Would that work? Can you get me a TikTok sound? Like a clock? Have a look in your box of tricks. Where's the day that she... Special prizes for anyone who can do it off the top of their head. As we touched on yesterday's programme, the poor woman is currently processing the knowledge that Boris Johnson worked harder to get the son of a KGB spy into the House of Lords than he did to get her the peerage that he had promised her. She can't find... Where's the date? When did she actually resign? I'll get it for you in a minute. And then we'll do Dorries Watch. Is anyone up for that? Here it is. Hang on. Immediate effect. 9th of June. Where are we today? It's about the 26th, isn't it? Of June. Just bear with. 27th. So 9th, 27 minus 9. That's 18 days. Is that 18 days? Yeah? Do you think we should have done this off air? I like to show people the workings. I like when it makes you feel part of the programme, right? When we do it like this, you feel as if you're there while the little grey cells are coming up with wonderful new ideas for broadcasting on the big show. Have you got a TikTok sound? I don't think that. Why does it got the buzzer on the end? What was that? No, you can't do. Can you get me one? I don't know if it sounds like a TikTok either. It sounds like that thing. Do you remember at junior school, that thing that with the two wooden bits and you held it and hit it like that if you had no musical ability whatsoever and someone had already got the triangle? There was like a sort of... like more of a countdown noise, like a tick, 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 tick. Can we do the countdown music? Would that work? Can we get the count? Anyway, it is now 18 days since Nadine Dorries promised to resign as an MP with immediate effect, and Nadine Dorries has not yet resigned as an MP. On tomorrow's programme, we will have some sound effects to accompany this feature, unless, of course, Nadine Dorries, who promised to resign with immediate effect on the 9th of June, has actually resigned by the 28th of June. Tick-tock, 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 tick-tock. Back to the other question that... entertains us, concerns us, draws our attention this morning. £169,000 per person to undertake the so-called deportations of people who may well turn out to have every right under international law to be seeking asylum and indeed to be finding asylum in this country. Riddle me that. Alan's in Fleet. Alan, what do you think?
James, I think unfortunately it's a long-term solution to resolve these problems, because these problems have been built over years of the Murdoch press and the Tories othering people.
You mean the problem of attitude rather than the problem of logistics, really? Yes.
Yeah, the building the animus towards these people.
Yeah,
what we need to do, I would suggest, a national service style apprenticeship scheme for people to work in the caring professions, to see hard work that all these immigrants in the National Health Service and caring fields do, because I don't see the reality. So have a national, and that would also work as a skills apprenticeship scheme for those people interested in those careers. Maybe give them a year experience and then give them an up into that career.
You mean knowledge is power? You show people the reality as opposed to the propaganda, and they change their minds. You're quite optimistic, because wouldn't it come down to? Oh no, we don't mean you. We don't mean them. We don't mean the ones that are working hard or the ones that are okay or
always possible, but I think we have to do it, and also then it builds it cuts away that power from the Murdoch press that this isn't the reality, because people will see reality and tell their friends and family the reality.
Yeah.
We have an empathy shortfall in this country.
Empathy bypass.
And that's been built over 20, 30, 40 years.
I think he's gone into a bypass.
We need to get rid of that and work towards it. And obviously the other thing is build proper social housing, have a proper plan, because that's often the ammunition they use, taking your houses, taking your jobs.
Yes.
So we need to cut that away as well and get proper social housing, because then the people who are looking for houses get houses. They won't then be able to blame immigrants for not having a house or social housing.
I think they would, but they would be on even thinner ice than they are already. So you've got low birth rate, right, in this country. You've got labour shortages, and you've got an ageing population. That is essentially an absolutely textbook scenario for needing more immigration. And we currently have higher immigration than ever, and yet 45,550 people who were so keen to come here that they risked their lives, we're going to pay £169,000 to send them to a country they've never been to and don't want to go to.
Yeah, well, that's just a nonsense scheme.
It is, isn't it, when you put it like that?
It's nonsense red meat to basically pretend they're doing something when in reality they're doing nothing. They're fiddling while Rome burns around them.
But I like your turn of phrase, Alan, but does anybody want this? So when we actually break it down, and we manage to do this most mornings on the programme, you take all the nonsense, all the hot air, all the noise, get it right down to the bare bones. People who are so desperate to come here, almost always in search of work, 45,550 of them we've got, and despite having huge labour shortages, a low birth rate and an ageing population, and a cost of living crisis and an economic catastrophe in place, we're going to spend £169,000 per person to send them to a country they don't want to go to and have never visited. Who's in favour? Now, who puts their hand up at this point? That wasn't Dorries Watch. That wasn't Dorries Watch in the background, was it?
No, I'm just getting a train.
All right.
Very few people, apart from the Tory right wing and the Murdoch press, I would assume.
I don't think they do, you see, because they're not reporting it in the way that you would expect them to. That's what's missing. I like your theory. I like the theory of exposing people to reality, but they saw reality in the run-up to Brexit, Alan. They saw their children's friends' parents working hard in this country, and they still voted to leave because we don't mean them. We don't mean them. We mean the other ones in Nigel's weird posters. We don't mean them. We mean the ones in the Sun, or we mean the ones in the Mail. We don't mean so on that. So it might work. I hope it works. But in the meantime, just riddle me that. We've got a low birth rate, labour shortages, an ageing population. There's 45,550 people who risked their lives to get here last year. Almost all of them would be desperate for an honest job. What are we going to do with them? Are we going to give them a job? No, we're going to spend £169,000 per person to send them to a country they've never heard of and don't want to go to. That's the Conservative government policy now. Now, hands up. Hands up if you like the sound of that. Who votes for this? This is what Suella Braverman dreams about at night. A front page of the Daily Telegraph with a picture of a plane porting people to Rwanda. Just don't mention it's going to cost £169,000 per seat. And of course, the other point about the money, so £106,000 to accommodate and support humans in the UK as they remain for an average of 4 years, that doesn't go to them. There'll be people listening to this thinking, well, I'd take £106,000. It doesn't go to them. None of this money goes, well, hardly any of this money goes to them. You want to be a hotel owner, is what you want to be. You can essentially stop looking after your hotel, turn it into a glorified doss house. These people get shipped in. You're going to get paid regardless of whether or not these places are habitable. It doesn't matter whether you've got cockroaches running around the place. It's not as if anyone can ring downstairs and complain. You're going to get all the money regardless of what happens. And then, of course, when the conditions in which they live are disgusting, you get some far-right lunatic turning up outside with a microphone saying, what's it like in there? And they say, well, it's actually disgusting. And then they'll stick it on social media going, oh, look at these scumbags complaining about what they've got in there. I mean, it's so predictable and boring and depressing that people still fall for it. Entire political parties built upon that sort of boneheaded bigotry. Sarah's in Stoke-on-Trent. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Well, I haven't got my hand up. I don't want to go to Rwanda.
No, but who votes for the policy?
Well, if I can cross the border from Rwanda to Tanzania and maybe go to the Masai,
that'd be nice.
I might climb Mount Kili, I might do, but
but more for a holiday, more for a holiday than the rest of your life.
Right now, so I just rang because I don't know. I've not spoken to you before, James.
Well, that's
and
a
it's lovely
perfectly
to speak
good
to you.
reason. That's a perfectly good reason to ring in, Sarah. I think it should be encouraged. I don't know why I've rung in, just because I've never spoken to. It's 1.46 million people forming an orderly crew.
So I'm one of those that came over to your not just to your show, but to LBC to get out of some echo chamber. So I am that migrant that you talk about.
Yes.
I came over as a young person. My parents came over to the United Kingdom, and I think it all depends on how you use a word.
Yes, it does.
Okay? So
yes,
to me, I am proud to be a migrant. Okay, and if anyone isn't, that's the other people's understanding of what I bring to this country.
Yes.
Now, we have been in the car, and my daughter has turned around to me and said, "Mummy, what does it feel like to be foreign?"
Gosh.
And I looked at her. Now, we look exactly the same colour because of the way I have married. So although I've married a person from England, we both are of roughly the same colour. We're Middle Eastern colour. And she looked at me. So we look the same, but she considers me foreign.
Gosh.
And she speaks English as her first language. And I said, nothing, no different, darling. Absolutely fine. And she is trying to work out in her own little head what that means.
Who do they mean when they use this word?
Yeah, absolutely. And it may have been something really innocent. It might not have been anything complex. You know, I don't want to impose my own complex adult thought processes on a straightforward child's mind.
Yeah.
But these things build up, aren't they? They're a very layer cake effect. So I need to be, how do I think about what I bring to this culture? Okay?
Yes.
And we can always go around and say, well, you brought nothing. Well, I may well have brought nothing, but from my point of view, I've brought something. Okay, what I've brought are children to this country who will hopefully build a better future for this country, right? I have brought my personal skills that I have learned in this country. What I find an issue with, and I was speaking to your colleague about this, the producer about this, and she was quite right in that it's all about, and it always has been, and it unfortunately always will be, about personal gain. What will make me remain in power? Let me listen to what people say. Oh, I know what, I'm going to tap into that. And I will, despite the fact that they may disagree with it, right? Yeah. I will carry on saying that because it means that I will win votes and I will remain in power.
We're going to run out of time, oddly, because my next question is, do they ever run out of road? Because it looks to me, I'm just checking that this is true. I think the BBC are reporting this as ministers say, here it is, the political editor of the BBC has written an article about this story under the headline, Ministers Think Expensive Migrant Plan Worth a Try. So we've reached the stage now in this site where, it's worth a try. £169,000 each, worth a try. Do they ever run out of road? I mean, do the people that were persuaded to vote for Brexit or to hate on people like you or to deploy this sort of language, do they today wake up and go, yay, £169,000 to send people...
Do you know why they wouldn't run out of road, James?
Go on.
The issue is that they are just so short on what they do for this country that they will never run out of road. So they will turn around to me and say, you went to a really good school on taxpayers' money.
Right.
You went to university partly on taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
You went to hospital and had your children on taxpayers' money. Okay? Look, the reason why your neighbour, who is white and is of Anglo-Saxon descent, can't afford to buy food is because you guys are coming over and sending all your children to our local schools.
Be able to blame
I would
you.
turn around and say it's lack of your investment. Your lack of investment in our schools, in our hospitals.
It's a wonderful scapegoat. It's the best thing, isn't it? It's the best thing.
Absolutely. And because they can weave that narrative that the reason why you are having problems around here is because there are foreigners coming in. Okay, and because they can say that, then they can.
They'll always have a little bit of road. So when they get into the detail of how they're going to quotes fix end quotes it, then they might run out of road and end up looking as ridiculous as they do today with this £169,000 a pop story. But when they're actually using the people that they're now proposing to spend £169,000 a pop on deporting to to enrage other people and to excuse themselves from the responsibility of governing, then they never run out of road at all, because it's such a heady brew. It's such a heady brew. Lots of people, whenever I talk about... Thank you, Sarah. It was a wonderful debut. I hope you enjoyed talking to me for the first time. I certainly enjoyed talking to you for the first time. Whenever we have these conversations, a lot of people send me a text pointing out that the transfer is two ways. If you look into the small print of the agreement of Rwanda, it also entails some people from Rwanda, some refugees in Rwanda coming into this country for reasons of not being safe in Rwanda. I don't know why you keep pointing that out. I think it's because you think that the racists who are cheering for this policy will be outraged when they find out that refugees are going to be coming in the opposite direction. I presume it is. I'm happy to mention it, but I'm a bit confused by the number of people who think it's really, really important to point it out. The numbers aren't really comparable, but I guess the principle is. 10:49 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It is 10:52. Just a little vignette on how the UK media works. True or false? A highly paid Daily Mail columnist has today published a love song about Boris Johnson set to the tune of Candle in the Wind by Elton John. True or false? All right, that's not fair. Here's some words that may or may not have been published in the Daily Mail today by an adult man about Boris Johnson, his fellow columnist. Goodbye, world king. So they've screwed you after all. You had the nerve to champion leave while those around you backed remain. I'm not going to sing it. They've crawled out of the woodwork and conspired to topple you for having the audacity to get us out of the EU. Though it seems to me you've lived your life on a gamble and a whim, but when push has come to shove, you found a way to win, and that's why they resent you, want to bury you for good, because you've always reached the parts these losers never could. True or false that someone got paid real money to write that in the Daily Mail today? And while you're puzzling over that one, true or false, Boris Johnson has been found to have committed a clear and unambiguous breach of the rules with his new Daily Mail column, because he hadn't told ECOBA, which is the watchdog responsible for MPs' outside earnings, that he was indeed writing a column for the Daily Mail. He tried to wriggle off it by saying he had actually written a column but hadn't signed a contract or been paid before he submitted his first column. But ECOBA have responded this morning in characteristically no-nonsense fashion. Briefing that by the proposed employer, as the former Prime Minister, Mr Johnson, is fully aware of his obligations under the Ministerial Code and the government's business appointments rules, former ministers must ensure that no new appointments are announced or taken up before ECOBA has been able to provide its advice. The committee therefore seeks an explanation for this breach of the government's rules. So there it is again, that fine upstander of British values, the Daily Mail. Even when hiring the proven liar, Boris Johnson manages to be complicit in Boris Johnson's latest breach of parliamentary rules. But anyway, Ed's in Hereford. Ed, back to Rwanda and that, frankly, almost undigestible nugget of fact that we now live in a country where people are being encouraged to celebrate that labour shortages plus 45,550 people coming here mostly looking for work, equals let's spend £169,000 per person to deport them to Africa. What would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I'm still shaking my head in disbelief at those incredible lyrics.
True or false? Do you think that was someone got paid?
They've got to be true. I'm sorry.
Come off it, mate. Though it seems to me you've lived your life on a gamble and a whim. But that was the only one that sounded right to me. They've crawled out of the woodwork and conspired to topple you. Yes, it is true. You're quite right. And it is, perhaps unsurprisingly, a columnist called Richard Littlejohn. On we go. Okay. Where were we, Ed?
Good morning. Frequent listener, occasional caller.
Well done.
How do we stop getting these stories? How do we stop getting these red meat policies, or whatever you want to call them?
Yes.
For me, it comes down to, who do we want in Westminster? What kind of politicians do we want? How do we make sure that the people who are supposedly representing our interests are the brightest and the best of us? Because that is surely really who they should be, instead of...
When do you think I'm a great fan of obviously, I'd be out of a job, I think, if you weren't allowed to criticise politicians in this country, although, of course, they have tried to create that scenario. Nadine Dorries accidentally publicly admitting that she'd tried to get me sacked on a number of occasions. But we are allowed to criticise politicians, and we always have. When did it change, in your view? I don't know how old you are, Ed, but when did it become an issue that the overall calibre is so low, in your view?
I'm similar age to you. I mean, I'm early 50s.
Yeah. All right, you sound younger than me.
Oh, very kind.
You're very welcome.
No, I think I from the 60s onwards, possibly.
Oh, would you go back that far? I don't know that I would. I kind of think, 2020 hindsight's a wonderful thing, but you just... did you see, what's his name? Brendan Clark Smith. Did you see what he did last night?
No, I didn't.
All right. There was a woman on Twitter, I think she's rung into the programme actually, Tanya, who revealed that she'd gone to the Samaritan stall at Glastonbury because she was struggling with ADHD and other issues. And this Brendan Clark Smith character, the MP for Bassetlaw, responded on Twitter. I think I might actually read you what he said, because I genuinely couldn't believe my eyes, and I'm a fairly committed student of Tory toxicity. He wrote, this is a woman saying, "Thank you to the Samaritans for looking after me at Glastonbury," right? That's the tweet. That's the message. Brendan Clark Smith, the MP for Bassetlaw, responds, "Vile internet troll in personal issues shock. Cares little for the welfare of others, however, when spouting her foul-mouthed bile on Twitter. Excuse me for playing the world's smallest violin." So that's the kind of character we're talking about, isn't it?
Well, this is what I mean.
But that's new. That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, mate.
Maybe not. I mean, social media's changed everything.
That's true.
But we do need to dramatically increase the quality of the people that represent us. And I think part of the answer, and this is going to be slightly contentious, is we need to pay our politicians more money than they're currently being paid. At the moment, we only attract power-mad narcissists, failed businessmen.
Or people who are already rich.
Or people who are already rich are just waiting to inherit daddy-in-law's company.
Yes. I don't think it is. Normally my heckles rise when someone says I'm about to say something controversial or I'm about to say something contagious. But there's an exception to every rule, and I think you were right to use that phrase because it is a very controversial suggestion. But something's got to change. Of course, I don't know if it makes much difference anyway, because if you're one of the worst, you can go and get a gig at GB News anyway to supplement your salary a few months after saying that MPs shouldn't be able to supplement their salaries with outside work. 10, 15, and I met that flipping Clark Smith bloke at the House of Commons the other night, and I didn't recognise him. You know what generally happens when people come up to me in social scenarios and try to be friendly when I find them repellent? If you don't, just ask that Richard Tice fella, he'll fill you in. But I didn't recognise him, so I was quite polite, and then I heard him introducing himself to someone else, so I had to sort of slide away subtly. Also, I was on duty. I was there in a work capacity, so it may not have been appropriate to do a Ketness. It's 11 o'clock.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's hackles, not heckles. Thank you for that. I might start every hour from now on with a little correction of a mistake that I made in the last hour. I think it'd keep you on your toes. It'd keep you listening, wouldn't it? What's he going to be embarrassed about next? I better leave the radio on. So your hackles, right? It's not your heckles. Where does heckles come from? Did I make heckles up? I don't know. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm going to try this one, but it may not work. Anyone who sends intimate pictures to another person without consent will face up to 6 months in jail under new laws. That's an odd opening paragraph to this story, because it seems to me to be more about so-called deep fakes, where images are manipulated to look like someone else, if you like. So it looks like someone recognisable is either naked or engaging in sexual activity, but it's not a real picture. It's a manipulated picture. The quality of so-called deep fakes is, it's been rising exponentially. It's pretty close to perfect. So that's going to be criminalised. And revenge porn, as it's called, when people share footage or images of usually of a former lover that they've broken up with in order to humiliate them or cause them distress, that it seems to be addressed by some of this new legislation as well. There was an astonishingly impressive young woman called Georgia Harrison a few months ago. You may remember that her former partner had posted private footage of them on his on one of his accounts, and he ended up being jailed, quite rightly. It took incredible courage. Sometimes you see someone on television and you just think, wow, that's incredible. That is really incredible. And I'm not a snob, but I am quite old. So I do find it hard to keep up with people who are in the public eye because they've appeared on a variety of reality television programs. And maybe a little bit of snobbery does kick in, and you sort of don't think of them as three-dimensional people. You think of it as quite an odd way to make a living or to pursue a career. There's no reason why you should think like that, and it's not even true at all. But, new stuff baffles old people. It's as old as the hills. So I probably hadn't noticed her before. And yet, when she was speaking, both outside court and then in a variety of interviews, a succession of interviews afterwards, I was profoundly impressed by her courage. I'm not going to be surprised by the fact that she's articulate or passionate, because that would be snobbish. But courage is always surprising to see in the flesh, and it took incredible courage to do what she did. But I mentioned my age a moment ago. That the notion of anybody. Oh, I see, an intimate picture. So that wouldn't just be of yourself, would it? There's a phrase for this, isn't there? It rhymes. I don't want to say it out loud. The second bit of the phrase is pick. And I remember a few years ago, I don't know if you were listening, I came on the radio and I expressed to you some surprise at the proliferation of these pics that men apparently send unsolicited to women. And I thought, that can't be right. That must be. I don't know that I've ever been torn apart so quickly by you as I was that day, with my suggestion that it must be a very niche pursuit. I can't imagine it happens to people on a regular basis. I was absolutely bombarded by women from pretty much every imaginable demographic. It wasn't confined to young people. It wasn't confined to single people. It was women from almost every imaginable demographic who told me that online, in certain contexts, it had become almost commonplace to receive photographs of men's privates, unsolicited, unwanted, and almost always unappreciated. I don't know that I've ever felt. I used to tell a story about my old man, my dad, he's not with us anymore. But there was a look on his face once that I remember, and it was a look of resigned befuddlement at the way the world was turning. And I think it comes to us all, doesn't it? In my dad's case, it was when he was picking me up from Digbeth coach station in Birmingham, and I'd been in London, and I'd spent a significant part of my pocket money on a pair of jeans that were already old and ripped. I'd gone to, I think, Hyper on Kensington High Street, and I'd bought some Levi's 501s that were falling apart at the seams, quite literally falling apart at the seams. That's where the figure of speech comes from. And I thought I looked like the bee's knees. You could see my own knees. I looked like the bee's knees in these jeans. And I got off the National Express at Digbeth coach station in Birmingham. My dad was picking me up, and he looked at me, and he said, "What are you wearing, son?" I said, "I just bought these, Dad." And he said, "What did you pay for them?" And what was it in those days, 30 quid or something? I mean, I think they cost at least as much as a pair of brand new jeans. And I just remember the look on his face, this sort of resigned befuddlement. It was as, I'm not going to be able to understand this. And I'm not, there's no point in me even trying. I've been happily married for 23 years. And the first time we were talking about unsolicited, intimate photographs being sent to women by men, I felt like my dad looked that day. I felt I'm never going to really be able to understand this, and I'm not sure there is much point me trying. And here we are now, looking at the suggestion that 6 months in jail under new laws for anybody sending intimate pictures. Now, that was quite a light-hearted way into this conversation, but looking at the story, I don't think it should be light-hearted as we continue. I want you to tell me what it's like to be violated in this way, because what was so impressive about Georgia Harrison was the clarity with which she explained what had happened to her. But she was famous, so it has a different resonance from what it would have if her violation was confined contextually to people she knew, or people who knew her, or people that she worked with. Do you see what I mean? I suppose I want to know how widespread this problem is, and one way of doing that is to walk the line between anecdote and data. If lots of people ring me now to tell me that they have been victims of revenge porn, you get a much clearer picture of how widespread it is. I know that it won't be a easy story to tell. Reading into this story, I don't think unsolicited pictures of a man's private parts are going to result in 6-month jail sentences. Possibly we could have a conversation one day about whether they should or not. But it's more about the absence of consent of the recipient. Prosecutors will no longer be required to prove intent to cause distress in order to secure a conviction of those who share intimate images without consent. So it's the consent of the people in the images that is the offence here. What happened to you? I keep it relative. I mean, you can tell me however the story you please, but how does it feel? The bit I can't quite imagine is the betrayal and the fact that you liked this person and you thought they liked you and you were in love and you were in a relationship, and then you break up and they do this unbelievable, this unspeakable thing. I don't know that including we can talk about deep fake images as well if it's happened to you. I don't know how widespread that is, but I do know that the removal of having to prove the intent to cause distress or for sexual gratification is it's got to be a step in the right direction. Why else would you do it? Why else would you send pictures of somebody else in flagrante delicto unless you were trying to offend them? 11 minutes after 11 is the time. You can tell by my voice that I'm oddly uncomfortable in this territory. I think it's for two reasons. I think I'm getting a little bit prudish as I get older. I don't know if prudish is quite the right word, but I'm getting a little bit less comfortable talking about subjects like this. But is it because of my children's age? I honestly don't know why. I used to be fine. I used to be a little bit schoolboyish, possibly, in approaching these sort of issues, but I certainly never had any reservations about discussing them. So that's part of the reason why you can tell, I think, from my voice that I'm not approaching this with quite the elan that I approach most subjects. And I guess the other reason is I'm conscious of, should I be embarrassed by how little I know about this? That's why I mentioned how long I've been married for. I've been married for 23 years. How would I know about this stuff? We barely had the internet when Mrs. O'Brien and I got together. You certainly didn't have cameras on your phone or anything like that. So that's the other bit that perhaps discomforts me. I don't know if I'd been born in a different era or if I'd been single in a different era, would I be feeling very differently about all of these stories? Liz has been in touch. I'm in my mid-50s. I've received more than 10 of those pictures you're referring to in recent years, all from different men. It doesn't upset me, luckily. I just laugh. So I don't necessarily want to get into that side of it. I just want to talk about... I don't know whether this is appropriate to point out, so I won't name any names. But I've already got men ringing in. I find it so odd on these subjects that this, I know men can be as violated as women can in many ways, but this is largely a story about men abusing women. I always get calls from men before I've even finished my introduction on subjects like this. It's the strangest thing. But it may turn out I'm being unfair, so don't take that as necessary. That's why I haven't named anybody. Don't take that necessarily as a given. So what happened to you and what was it like? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. How do you greet the news that prosecutors will no longer be required to prove intent to cause distress? Someone sends intimate images without consent. They are hopefully going to jail. Hopefully they're going straight to jail. How do you respond to that news and why? But obviously the question underpinning all of this is your story. The simple experience of receiving images or finding out that someone has been sharing images of you that you would not have want to see made public in a million years. Okay, I'm going to open up the phone lines now. I know some of these stories will be difficult to share, but the reason I'm doing it, and the reason I've talked about my own discomfort in doing it, is that it needs to be out there more. It needs to be talked about more so that people like Georgia Harrison don't have to carry such burdens alone. It has to be a bigger story. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What's it like to be caught up in these sorts of crimes? It's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It is 11:17 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a funny one, you know. When we first started talking about the internet and the law, the observation was that the law will not catch up with the internet for a long time. The law never catches up. It takes a while for the laws to catch up with new technology, largely because so many clever criminals out there are pushing the boundaries all the time. And this seems like a shining example of that. Sharing intimate images without consent will carry a prison term is the headline in the Telegraph. I'm still a bit unclear on whether that would include you sending a picture of your private parts to someone who hadn't asked to see them. But if it did, we'd need a hell of a lot more prisons, wouldn't we, by roughly tea time tomorrow. Cara is in Dublin. Cara, what made you pick up the phone?
I wanted to call you, James, about my daughter,
Yes.
who was, quite frankly, violated at work. You know, she works in a supermarket. An older man in his 60s came in, and someone that she knows.
Right.
She
knows him as a customer or knows him outside?
Knows him as a customer,
Right,
not a friend or anything or associate. Knows him as a customer, always a bit odd, you know, makes sort of derogatory comments about gay people and transgender people. And she's great now. She handles it really well. She's very mature.
Sure.
She's just turned 19. But this day, this gentleman was, well, I'm not going to call him a gentleman, he's definitely not a gentleman anymore in my eyes, started to get a bit of a rant again about people having, you know, surgery and whatever.
Yes.
And the next thing
he's the target audience for that kind of journalism. Then. I'd been wondering, but carry on.
100%. And but the next thing he got his phone and he basically shoved a picture in her face, and it was a man's genitalia, you know, and she was utterly speechless. Like, she didn't know what to do or say.
You wouldn't, would you?
Now, one of her colleagues saw the event, and he approached her and he said, "You okay? What's just happened?" And she told him, and then the manager was involved, security involved. Now, fortunately, that man's now been banned from going into the shop.
What I find really, I don't know if helpful is quite the right word, but somehow when you think of online abuses, you're thinking of there's the culprit could be 100 miles away. But the way your daughter's experience is horrible, and I'm glad she was looked after at work. She should never have been put in that situation in the first place. But it might help people who don't take this subject very seriously to understand how serious it is, because the idea of physically shoving the photograph in her face shouldn't be any more shocking than it popping up on her own phone unsolicited, should it? And yet I think it feels different.
Yeah, this is how I feel. I feel it. It's no different, really.
Because it's that's why you use the word violation. But something popping up I think that might be why it's taken so long for the law to catch up, because it's only popped up on your phone. Just delete it, just move on. Whereas it's exactly the same as what happened to your daughter. Is she all right?
She's good now. She's grand and she's handled it really, really well. But she was a bit nervous because the management have now said, look, we're looking at possibly prosecuting this man.
Yeah.
So, you know, things could go further and she could end up in court or whatever. I don't know what's going to happen, but this has happened very recently. But she definitely has a level head, and, you know, she's a smart girl. She always says to me, Mum, you know, you get great life experience working in
all human life is here, ma'am, she says. All human life is here, including some of the elements of it that perhaps we'd rather not encounter. Thank you, Cara. I mean, it is so bizarre to think of how quickly the technology has created a space in which much of the stuff we're talking about could happen. But of course, Cara's daughter's experience could have happened at any point. Could have just been what would you do if someone marched up to your daughter in a supermarket in 1975 and shoved a Polaroid picture of a man's genitals in her face? Think of it in those terms if you're struggling to see the severity of the crime in modern terms. A couple of phone lines free. Lots of different responses coming in, I can see. The one, so it was a slightly convoluted introduction, wasn't it? But the one I'm particularly interested in is this notion of revenge porn, when an ex or a disappointed partner, or even a partner who hasn't told you, is sharing stuff featuring you. That level of violation, I don't think it should have taken so long for it to be criminalised still further. The idea that you'd have to prove intent to cause distress seems a little silly. But as I say, it takes a while for the law to catch up with the technology. Zilika is in Birmingham. Zilika, what would you like to say?
Hello. Well, sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
Take your time.
What it was, this happened when I was 16. Well, I'm now 34.
Right.
But, a guy who I was seeing at the time, I thought we was getting close and things like that.
Mm.
But, and then, one night, we was outside and, was, having, sexual intercourse.
Okay.
And, he used his phone as, I thought he was using his phone as a light because, it was dark outside.
Right.
And I never thought anything of it. And then, a few days later, I got told, I've seen a video of you and things like that for, people around my area.
Yeah.
And then, I was going to college at the time, and my college is on, the other side of where I'm from, Birmingham.
Right.
And then some guy told me, he's like, I've seen you at my cousin's house. And I was like, I thought that was odd. And then he told me that, he's seen the video. And then when he, seen that, that's when it started to spread even more. And then, the days after that, I was just paranoid. It just felt like everyone had seen it, and everyone was watching it. And, even when I spoke to him, he didn't really care. And then I could feel tears coming down when he was walking in front of me. I just tried to hold it in and things like that.
Did it? I'm so sorry that you went through that. And I'm just trying to work out where we were 18 years ago technologically. Was he sending the footage to other people, or was he just showing it to them on his own phone?
I think he was just sharing it to everyone, because people who wasn't in my social group around in my area, they seen it. So I don't know how it got spread.
Oh,
and even school friends seen it, and people fell out with me and things like that.
They sort of turned their back on you when really you needed friendship more than ever.
Yeah, quite a lot of people. And plus at the same time, I know it's kind of bad, but the same guy, he had also been with one of my friends previously, so I think that's the reason why as well. People fell out of me because of that on top.
How did it did it peter out, Zilika? How long did the terrible bit last? Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah. I think it just settled. I just literally, the paranoia, it still went on, but then I stopped speaking to him.
Right.
And then after a bit, it did stop. And then, I know he did also spread rumours about me.
Oh, dear.
And I just remember I had conversations with my friend, and this was probably 2 years ago.
Yeah.
She actually told me, and she was sticking up for me because she knew, exactly.
So even now, even nearly 20 years later, it's still a topic of conversation?
Yeah. And, I know it has, affected me a lot.
How?
Even though I got sent, a spam letter. It was just a spam from someone from school.
Right.
And said, video of you. And I thought it was a video, but I didn't click in it.
Okay.
And then that just triggered everything again. But,
of course.
Yeah.
How common was it then? Did it happen to other people at school or at college?
Not that I know of, because back then it was just mostly a basic kind of phone.
That's
so
what I thought.
But I can remember I did confront him about it years later.
Yeah, what did he do?
But he just remember he didn't know who I was or anything like that, and then he just blocked me. So.
What a scumbag! I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I really am. I bet it affected your confidence as well, didn't it? Afterwards.
Yeah, I would say I've never been in a relationship, Like, I think that has probably...
Really?
But there have been... Yeah, I've never been in a relationship or anything like that. But there have been much worse things happen to me, and I think that's all just, like, affected everything. So, yeah.
I'm sorry. I really am sorry. And it can't be easy to tell their story, but it will help other people understand how serious this subject is, because as quite a few of my texters are saying, people still think it's funny. They still think it's, everyone gathers around sniggering and stuff like that. But not just your words, Zalika, but your voice as well conveys just how hurtful and damaging it would be, which is why it's surprising, but not surprising, that it's taken so long for the law to catch up with the reality of it. Anyone who sends the sort of footage that Zalika's talking about without consent will face up to 6 months in jail under new laws. It'd be nice if it was retrospective. You could track this scumbag down and get him hauled before a court, but I don't know how feasible that is. Do take care. A lot of text coming in, as you'd expect. My 14-year-old daughter has had pics posted on her school friend's WhatsApp group by boys. Luckily, she's very strong mentally. She took it well. She ridiculed it, actually, and left the group. But this was a group with 30-plus young teenagers on it. And this is partly where I feel discomforted talking about it, because I don't know how silly it sounds to say don't ever be photographed in these sort of situations. I don't know how silly or out of touch that sounds. Do you see what I mean? Because I'm old and I've been married for 23 years. Don't do it early on in a relationship or something like that. But you could be married for 20 years and then the footage in a bitter divorce, someone uses it, sticks it on Facebook, sends it to your boss, all that sort of thing. It's a really, really weird subject, this, because it has so many unknown unknowns. Normally we're good at the known knowns and the known unknowns, but the unknown unknowns, unless you've been through it, which is why Zalika's words, and I'm sure you agree, her voice as well, conveyed so much pain. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is a change for good, this shift in legislation, but of course it will be too late for many, many people who've already been through similar experiences. If you want to tell me about yours, if you want to talk about yours, 03456060973 is the number that you need. It is just coming up to 11:30. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
33 minutes after 11 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Anyone who sends intimate pictures to another person without consent will face up to 6 months in jail under new laws. It was criminalised only in 2015, so-called revenge porn, but until now you've had to prove that there was an intention to cause humiliation or distress, or that it was for sexual gratification, which does seem odd, doesn't it? It'll be some sort of hangover from previous legislation. But MPs, campaigners, fighting violence against women, and the change in the law would make it easier to prosecute those sharing intimate images without the need to prove intent. And I'm just wondering what it does to a person, what it's like, because I get a lot of messages, and we don't do conversations like this very often, but I get a lot of messages. I tell you what, this will help. It puts it in a kind of generational context. Even when we talk about so-called, think of the word flashing, right? Even that has trivialised connotations. You still could buy postcards of a fella in a dirty Mac, You speak to a young woman who has been a victim of indecent exposure, and there is nothing end of the pier, seaside, smutty postcards about it whatsoever. Some women, of course, are able to deal with it in a very dismissive fashion and don't appear to be traumatised by it in any way. I used to tell a story on the radio about an acquaintance of mine pointing at someone who had indecently exposed himself to her and saying to her friends, look, it's like a penis, only smaller. And I used to love that story. I thought it was hilarious, and I was being an ally, and it's, feminist resilience. But actually, you have to imagine the better, more useful, more illustrative story is the one of the woman who's completely traumatized by the experience or horrified. And we've done it. I don't know what I turned into then. We've done it on the show. Again, one of those subjects that popped up out of nowhere, and it was fascinating how many people still thought it was relatively trivial, and how many of our callers were telling us just how deeply traumatic it was. And the further back in time you go, the more traumatic it became that people didn't take it seriously, including your own mum, for example. So someone exposed themselves to you on the bus, you went home, you told your mum, you were in a state of trauma is the word that I'd use, and your mum was like, oh, come off, it happens to us all, get over yourself. Somewhere in there is the conversation about trigger warnings. The idea that, oh, shut up, you don't, that idea that just because you don't think you are susceptible to certain mental violations, nobody else should be allowed to be either. That somewhere in there is the problem. But again, it just feels a few feet out of reach today. 36 after 11 is the time. Debbie's in Pinner. Debbie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. I've got a couple of things, really. Hi.
Yes.
So I'm a teacher, and you would be surprised how common this actually is, and things that we deal with in school all the time.
What about Zalika's story of footage, as it were, of sexual encounters being... Do you deal with that a lot of the time?
Well, not so much so,
No,
actually.
good.
Often it's sort of the shy girls who literally have somehow been caught out, and then they are completely destroyed and distraught, obviously, by... I don't know how these images come about. They're all different situations.
So when you say shy girls, you mean someone has been encouraged to send a picture of themselves to a boy?
Quite often it will be that kind of thing.
Because
it might
she's
be
desperate for a bit
special
of
needs.
acceptance or... God.
Or children who are vulnerable and easily manipulable.
Okay.
But that kind of wasn't what I
No,
ran in
fine.
for, because I sort of picked that up. But it was the sort of element of them being so young, because my daughter is 20, but
Right.
a very young-looking 20.
Okay.
And she was in McDonald's a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
and somehow somebody picked her up on a hotspot or something like that in the same restaurant and sent an image of himself to her, and was then watching her while she opened the image. And obviously she was, she didn't know how to react.
No.
Now, she could quite easily have been underage.
Of course.
And I think the worst thing of all of this is, and having been myself young and being sort of inappropriately touched on the tube and so on when I was at university, I think is the embarrassment you feel. And so we don't, now at 54, I would call somebody out on that.
Yes.
But when you're young, you just feel embarrassed. And actually, it's shame. And completely ill-placed.
And that centuries of conditioning makes the woman feel ashamed of the man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's just, you can't quite articulate that, can you? I can't anyway.
No, and she was obviously scared as well, because he's so close and she's on her own, and he.
It'd be airdrop, would it? It
probably was airdrop. I mean, I'm not very technical, but
nor am I. But we should be, shouldn't we?
Yeah, we should. Well, we should. Yes. More than but that was what I wanted to share with you. Really,
what did she do? Did she just sit there and? I mean,
she left. She left, but she didn't know whether he was going to follow her or whatever.
And how did she know it was him? If you understand my question,
because he was looking at her. She turned round and he was looking at her, and
God. Well,
that
should be. I think that should be a criminal offence.
Well, exactly. I think it should be a criminal offence too, because it's no different from
exposing yourself.
Yes, exactly. It's very similar to, well, it's the same as flashing, except for, no.
You need a new name. I prefer indecent exposure, because for the very simple reason that flashing still makes us think of Dirty Macs and seaside postcards, doesn't it?
Yes.
Which is
but I would say, but it's not uncommon for her either. She's a lovely looking girl, and she gets all sorts of horrendous, inappropriate sort of advances from men. Men will follow her on the streets. They'll sort of call out to her, and she feels embarrassed a lot of the time.
This might sound silly.
Men are predators.
I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? And now you do the hashtag not all men thing, but that's no help at all to her when she finds herself in these sort of circumstances. I mean, clearly, I know this, but again, why should she change her behaviour in order to insulate ourselves from the kind of conduct you're describing? But I guess, we should point out that you can set your phone up in such a way that wouldn't be susceptible to this sort of thing, I suppose. Or you could change your profile name on your phone to, I don't know, Big Bob, or just, John, so you don't look like and not have a photograph there, just so it looks but again, you're changing your behaviour to accommodate these scumbags. Daisy's in Bexley. Daisy, what would you like to say? Thank you, Debbie. I'm sorry for your daughter. Daisy, what would you like to say?
Hey, so I'm 19 now, but when I was in secondary school...
All those years ago.
Way back when. I remember it happening, all the time, all the way from year 7 to year 11. It was always happening to girls in my year. And I remember when it happened to me once, like, because it was on Snapchat most of the time.
Right.
And you just, like, block them or report them.
Yeah.
But nothing would ever be done about it. So one time I just replied and I was like, what? Because it's never people you know, really.
Okay.
Well, from my age group anyway, it was never really people we knew.
Right.
It was like just these random people that found your Snapchat.
So not people you were at school with?
Yeah, I think literally every girl I was friends with.
No, but the pictures weren't being sent by boys from your school. They were just being...
Oh, no, just random men on the internet.
Oh,
like, they
God.
were just like, yeah. Obviously, boys did do it as well from our school, but it was more like people we didn't know. So I remember one time when I got sent one, I just replied, like, what are you doing? I don't want to see that. Like, do you not think it's weird what you're doing? And they just replied, like, don't you want to see that or something like that? Just something weird. But when you on Snapchat, I feel like nothing ever gets done about it.
Yeah, that's another element of this as well, isn't it? So it's all very well prosecuting individuals, but the platforms via which it's happening are obviously culpable as well. I don't know. I feel so out of touch some mornings, Daisy. I just can't quite get my head around what your generation has almost come to accept as normal behaviour.
Yeah, because that's how I think everyone sort of thought of it as normal. Like now I think back, it's a bit weird.
Absolutely abnormal.
It could have been like
deeply weird.
50, 60.
No, of course, it's gross, and nowhere to go with it. Really, no one to point to. No way of getting redress or punishment or any form of. And that brings us back again to this game of catch up between technology and the law, and that is the online equivalent of indecent exposure, isn't it? I don't think there's much difference. I would have done once. I used to think emails were different from letters. Seriously, in the context of privacy conversations, I used to think that it's not the same as breaking into your house and going through your drawers and finding all your private correspondence, just reading someone's emails, but it is. Of course it is. Just technology takes a while to settle. Thank you, Daisy. 11:42 is the time. Darren is in Hammersmith. Darren, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
how are
mate.
you?
I'm very well. What's on your mind?
It happened to me. I was obviously I'm a bloke, but I...
Thanks for clearing that up.
Cheers. My ex-partner, I had a pretty nasty, dramatic breakup with him.
Yeah.
And he shared a video of me pleasuring myself onto a very well-known website. And then went a stage further. I work with kids. He went a stage further and then sent the link to the LADO, which is like the person in charge of safeguarding for your borough. He then went up to the top of my organisation and then went all the way down through my organisation to landed at the sort of person in charge of like my immediate person in charge of safeguarding. He then sort of phoned me and said, I'm really sorry, I've got to send you an email. Can you just have a look and come back to me? Send me an email, open an email, and it's like this link was, it's like, is this you? Is this you? And have you posted it? And it's the most mortifying thing in the world.
Well, tell me about that moment, if you can.
I was at work.
Yeah.
So I was at work, and I opened the link, and everything just went cold. Like everything just stopped around me. And then you have this weird. You have the first moment you sort of feel like, oh my God, is that me? Oh my God, that is me.
Yeah.
And then after you're like, oh my God, who's seen this?
Yeah.
And then a couple minutes later, you start getting your head around the idea that theoretically everybody that is bounced up and down the way through the line has seen it, and it's just like, well, everyone's of course you didn't look at it. Well, of course you did, because otherwise you wouldn't be asking if it was me or not, right?
Yeah. Do you feel sick now? Because do you feel a little bit sick now remembering it, or has enough water gone under the bridge?
Luckily, I've got sort of good mates, and I was able to, you sort of laugh about it now.
Good.
Hopefully, I didn't have too much to be embarrassed about. But it's awful, right? And at the time, I was lucky for my organisation because I had a well documented history of harassment with this partner.
Right.
So I was fortunate in the sense that they believed me.
You had the context in which to make the claim.
But when I went to the police,
Yeah.
because I went to the police about harassment, there was at the time I was told, this is a few years ago now, I was told that you do not believe this. I was told that when they called him up to ask him a question, he immediately told them that he wasn't in the country and had been in the country for a while. And so there was some sort of nuanced law that allowed him to harass me online, digital, because that is a form of harassment at the time. And because he's not UK based,
how would they arrest him? How would they arrest him anyway? So, I mean, that's the oldest.
But the fact that the crime was committed online, but not in his country, means it wasn't subject to our laws. Which was just that was one of the most disappointing moments in the way you think, okay, this is because you think about the people that I've seen, that I think the parents, the kids I work with, the kids, it's really, really, it's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened in my life.
Of course it is. I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine what it would be like. I'm glad that you've kind of managed to get past it, but the oh man alive, that word violation it barely does the job, does it? I'm glad. Thank you, Darren. I'm glad you're in a position to share that story, but there'll be plenty of people listening to this now who have been horribly triggered and will never be able to tell the story about what has happened to them. And I just to let you know that you're in our minds as well. It's 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 minutes after 11 is the time. Some interesting revelations coming out at the COVID inquiry as Matt Hancock gives evidence. We'll have a look at some of that before 1 o'clock today. I haven't decided yet what to do in the next hour of the programme, but I've got a couple of ideas. If there's something you feel we should be talking about, do feel free to give us a shout. You can tweet at Mr. James OB or text 84850. Back to the question. I think, as the last caller proved, as Darren proved, it isn't one of those subjects where I get to be all holier than thou and dismissive of men ringing in, because it can be just as traumatic, certainly just as violating for men as women. We're talking about revenge porn or the sending of intimate pictures to another person without consent, which will now face 6 months in jail under new laws. And we've scratched the surface of this story, and I can suggest that there's going to be all sorts of potential prosecutions unfolding on a scale that perhaps the authorities won't be prepared for. Nathan's in Waltham Forest. Nathan, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello, mate.
I was just ringing in because I was listening to the show and I just found it really interesting. And I think it made me look kind of deeper into my own journey and my own experiences.
Go on.
Because when, being young, I think it's, at the time, you don't really realize how much taking these photos or having these images on your phone affects the people that are affected by it, really and truly. Yeah. And I think when you're young, when it's around peer pressure, or when you're around like a group of your friends and, they're meeting different people, or they've kind of started their journey a lot more earlier, and maybe whether it be like you're getting bullied or it is just the peer pressure to try and prove, yes, I have started my relationship process and so on and so forth. So I just found it so interesting that at that time, I remember being really young and I didn't think anything about it. And I remember an experience that I had, that I was in a relationship for probably about 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And after we had broken up, I think a year and a half afterwards, I had met her again and we was talking and we was going through old photos that I had, and kind of one popped up that was a little bit more explicit. And the way that she reacted, she was like, "Get rid of it, delete it. Please, I don't want it on the phone." And I was just so shocked. And I was like, wow, that's when I really realized how it would affect, the people that you're engaging in these moments with. And I think even at that point and at that time, I kind of was like, oh, but when you're with someone, it's fine. Sometimes it's part of a relationship. Sometimes it's okay at the time, but afterwards it's not. And you don't really realize the effect it can have on someone.
And then, you're at the, generationally speaking, your generation and those around it were navigating this territory for the first time in many ways because of the technology's availability.
Yeah, very, very true. And I think that's what kind of brings me on to this next point, that as from that point on, I remember I just got rid of any photos or any information I had of anyone. But growing up and obviously being 30 now, for men as well, I found it really interesting that there were so many things maybe coming out of people being accused or people being, wrongly accused. And I've spoken to people that some people use it as kind of like, protection for themselves.
Oh, I see.
If anything ever does come up, they can say, well, this was agreed upon, or it didn't just go one way, as evidence, and so on and so forth. So I just find it interesting, the timeline that I've gone through, or maybe society goes through, or maybe young men or men that are a lot older now. The process.
No, you're right.
There's
so much going on, isn't there? So many different elements to this that are I mean, people have been dealing with them like you in person, in private, but the politics and the public space has only started addressing them very belatedly. So when you were younger and a friend wanted to show you footage of him with a girl, I presume that you wouldn't, and I'm not judging you because I don't know that I would have done when I was that age, you wouldn't have called him out. You wouldn't have said, delete that, man, that's wrong.
No, not at all. And I'm just being honest.
Of course.
Again, like, we don't, at that time, at that age, I really and truly didn't understand. I didn't understand the repercussions of what would have happened if it came out. I think you're just dealing with your friend and you're like, what? Like, if anything, you're kind of cheering them on, which I feel like right now, being the age that I am and the experiences that I've had, it's so bad. And I wish that maybe at the time I could have been like, no way. Especially if you grow up and you think about it. You have daughters and you have sisters, and you think, what would happen if a photo came out about them? So no, at the time when you're young, I don't even think that you look at it.
No, you wouldn't. No, I think you're right. I mean, I'd respect your honesty, but what sort of a 15, 16-year-old boy would you be if you started objecting to that kind of stuff? And with your friends, you'd be a very rare character indeed. Very rare character. It's a crazy conversation, isn't it? It's a really strange one because it's not got any firm ground underneath it. You and I now know that is obviously wrong, but when you were looking at it through the eyes of a teenage boy, it was far from clear. It was far from firm.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I think
Nathan.
we need to do more.
We do.
Do more, maybe.
Yeah.
And just educate young people about it and the repercussions, because as well, at the time, yes, I was young and I didn't know, but maybe if there was a bit more information about the repercussions and maybe more people coming forward, and like the talk show that you're having now, it's brought me forward. Like, I think it will be really good.
I think you're right. Well, I hope you're right. And the thing about repercussions, of course, generationally, there weren't many when you were young. It hadn't. These stories hadn't run their course. Alika's been in touch by text to say thank you for giving her the space to tell her story. And some people listening to that might well adjust their own conduct in the future, men and women, in order to accommodate the repercussions that she described. Thank you, Nathan. 11:56 is the time. Isabel's in Bracknell. Isabel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I am calling just because my brain is just firing and on all cylinders when it comes to this subject, because as somebody who is also 30, I think your previous caller said he was 30, we're the generation that's kind of had to navigate this.
Exactly that. That's what I was trying to say.
This crazy world, online,
and it's all new. There's no guides to it and there's no precedents.
Exactly. And like the thing is, some of us were 12 when we were using things like chat roulette, which was where you would just go through. You click on a button and you come up to a new person, and a lot of the time it would be explicit. It would be men sat there pleasing themselves. Gosh. And we just grew up thinking that was like, oh, this is what we do. And then, navigating the airdrop thing happens to me all the time in London. Like, I'll be on a train and I will be airdropped an image, and you think this person is sat somewhere on this train sending me this image. But it happens to me so often.
Can I ask, forgive me if this is an inappropriate question. Why would you not just switch it off? Why would anybody ever have it on? What's the advantage? And I know I'm sounding old.
Actually, now I do have it switched off. But I remember when it first started happening, it was like, why would someone be airdropping me an image? It's kind of, I guess, intrigue. Yeah. And not expecting it to be that, which naively at the time, I was like, completely shocked. And it happened, I remember it happened to me at Thorpe Park as well.
Lord.
Like, yeah, exactly. I don't know, and I think now we're more clued up to it, so I do have my airdrop switched off. But when it first started happening, and that was only a couple of years ago.
Yes.
I
think it's the default setting on the phone, actually, quite often, so you wouldn't even know it was there until it started happening to you, and then you'd have to try and process
and social media just being another. Like, I run a sobriety platform where I get a lot of people that message me asking for help, and sometimes we'll have conversations with people, and then suddenly it will turn to an explicit image, and you think, God's sake, I've just wasted my time helping somebody that... Yeah, all the time. And girls' DMs are often, the requests are full of people that you think, I know exactly where that conversation is going to go. I'm not even going to accept it. But it's so normalised.
Thank you for helping me understand some of this stuff. I just, and again, for the second time, I'm going to say I hope this isn't an inappropriate question. But does it ever work? I just can't quite imagine anyone saying, how did you and Daddy meet, Mummy? And Mummy says, he sent me a filthy picture on my phone when I'd never met him before, and we've been together.
That's what's so interesting. Of course it doesn't work.
No.
But it's like, what baffles me is it's men, and it may happen on the other foot. I don't want to speak out of turn, but what is the psychology behind that makes you feel like you can cross that boundary so quickly? And it scares me because I've got people close to me who have been sexually assaulted, and we talk about the justice system, and it didn't come out in their favour, and so the trust in the justice system. I hope this new law makes changes. I don't know if it will, because my trust is not.
No, the proof will be in the pudding, won't it? We can't.
Exactly. But what is it? What we need to be addressing the psychology of why people
feel
there's
two
that
things.
they can cross this boundary.
Yeah, well, look, the desire to violate is at least understandable, even as it is reprehensible. But the sort of, as you mentioned, sliding into messages and things like that, it sounds almost as if I can get my head around the online equivalent of indecent exposure. But the idea that some men think that this is a form of courtship is close to incomprehensible. Isabel, thank you. My apologies to Ziggy and to everybody else waiting. I'm going to move on after the hour. That was all right. As you could tell, I find that for some bizarre reason I'm uncomfortable in these conversations. I don't have any sense of a firm ground beneath my feet, as I explained to Nathan. But goodness me, not for the first time, some brilliant callers helping me navigate some rather difficult territory. It's just gone 12 noon. There's two contenders for the next hour, one of which is Melvin Bragg describing the portrayal of the working class on the television as miserable.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 12 is the time, dear James. I have your correction for the top of the hour. It's not the proof is in the pudding. It is the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Thank you, Jason. I told you I'm going to make a deliberate mistake in every hour moving forward. You know how these ideas work on the programme, and we have a wizard idea. I usually manage to keep it in my mind for at least half a show. But certainly by the end of that day's programme, or at the very least by tomorrow, I will have completely forgotten. Although with Dorries Watch, to be fair, we've completely forgotten about Woke Watch. Woke Watch was great fun. I don't know why. We should have been doing a Woke Watch every day. We even had a thing for it, didn't we, Keith? Didn't we have a thing for Woke Watch? I'll tell you what. You do the Woke Watch one, but leave the microphone on, and I'll say Dorries over the top. All right, on 3, 2, 3. Dorries.
Watch.
That didn't quite work. Let's try again. 2, 3. Dorries. Watch. Can we do that? No. What is Dorries Watch? I hear you ask. Well, we're just counting the days since Nadine Dorries said on the public record that she was going to resign as a Member of Parliament with, quotes, immediate effect, end quotes. No, that's going to make people think there's something wrong with their radio, mate. It's nice, though. Thank you. It's good to see, That's Jeopardy, is it? I don't think it'll work with a British audience, will it? It sounds like no, that's not going to work. It's nice though. That I could sit back, put my feet up, have a drink of tea, but it doesn't have the sense of, bizarrely, Keith, it has no sense of Jeopardy, that music, which is an incredible irony when you think about it. So we need something that conveys the fact that we're taking the mickey with the fact that there is actually a genuine countdown on, and it is now, hang on, 18 days since Nadine Dorries promised to resign, or said she was going to resign as a Member of Parliament with, quotes, immediate effect, end quotes. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. This is intriguing to me. This is the sort of thing we normally do on Fridays at 12. But to be honest, the story was published yesterday, and I probably will have forgotten about it by Friday. So I thought we'd talk about it today. The Shadow Arts Minister has highlighted an astonishing drop in the number of students taking arts, plural, GCSEs. So that is, I think, drama and music most obviously, but there'll be other subjects as well. Do you remember when Dominic Raab mocked Angela Rayner for going to the opera? I thought that was a really interesting moment, actually. I thought the casualness with which a senior Tory could contend that a Labour politician from a very working class background is something Angela talks about a lot, including on Full Disclosure, actually. It got no business being at the opera. I thought, there's a lot of very obnoxious things about Dominic Raab, and I just thought that was among the most obnoxious. Also, these fake snobs are the worst. If you know proper toffs, right, they are not anything like middle class, upper middle class, aspirational people think they are. So you get someone pretending to be a toff, like a Jacob Rees-Mogg, or someone pretending to be elite or superior, like Dominic Raab. They are nothing like proper toffs. It can be the most down-to-earth. Listen, they might own half of Norfolk, but they can be some of the most down-to-earth people you would ever meet in your life. Do you know why? Because they've got absolutely nothing to prove. That's the point. Jacob Rees-Mogg has got so much to prove. He has to prove that he's posh. He has to prove that he's clever. He's none of those things. Dominic Raab trying to prove that he is to the manner born by mocking Angela Rayner for being a champagne socialist. It spoke to something deeper than that. It spoke to the idea that the arts are not for the likes of you. That's what Raab was subscribing to. Raab's the son of a refugee. He's no more to the manner born than Angela Rayner is. And the difference being, I suppose, that she wouldn't want to be. She's confident and comfortable in her own skin, whereas Raab always had the air of some. In fact, there were times where it looked like that throbbing vein on the side of his head. It looked like he was trying to break out of his own skin. So I mention this in passing whenever we do subjects like this, because the audience is growing all the time, and you may not know about it. But I went to a posh school, and the arts have played a huge part in my life. Huge, immeasurable. Drama so much. I wasn't so much a music person. But bizarrely for me, one of the most seminal experiences of my life was going to a youth theatre in Manchester in my teens that very much reached into corners of the community that I wouldn't have encountered ordinarily. So I could do school plays at my public school, with astonishing facilities, brilliant directors, amazing productions, truly amazing, semi-professional productions. I was always going to have that. But when I joined the Manchester Youth Theatre in 1988, I was doing plays and doing productions with children from backgrounds a million miles away from my schooling. But I think the Manchester Youth Theatre is one of those organisations that has not survived. So I do think, what I want you to really do is tell me that I'm paranoid. But I think it's deliberate. I think that the drop in the number of students taking arts GCSEs, and I haven't told you what the figure is yet, since 2010 when David Cameron got in, I don't think it's an accident. I really don't. It's gone down by 40%. 40% the numbers of young people doing arts GCSEs. And I will give you a pound to a penny that drop has been felt much, much, much more in the state sector than it has in the private sector. It was a panel on arts education at the Theatre and Touring Summit in London on Monday when Barbara Keeley, who is the Shadow Arts Minister, highlighted the stark drop in the number of students taking arts GCSEs. So 12,000 fewer students taking music. Number of drama teachers in state-funded secondary schools in England has fallen by 22% in 2011, a 15% decline in music teachers, 12% decline in the number of art and design teachers over the same period. And if you go back over the past 2 years, the number of art and design trainees has nearly halved. Barbara Keeley said the government's squeeze on arts, culture and creative subjects is self-defeating. And she's obviously right, especially as we try and plug some of the gaps caused by Brexit and other economic crises. The idea that we'd be limiting the options open to young people for future careers that they can follow is about the stupidest thing imaginable in the current circumstances, which leads me to the question, why is it happening? And it's either happening by accident or deliberately, right? I don't think there's a third. Is there a third option? Why is this happening? It's happening by design or it's happening by accident. My theory is, my contention is, my belief is, 11 minutes past 12 this morning, that it's happening by design. But I'm not a teacher. And I don't have experience of the state sector, either as a parent or since my children left primary school, or as a pupil, for the reasons that I explained to you a moment ago. The theatre at my school. My school had a golf course, had an 18-hole golf course. Do you know, it had a pack of beagles, my school. It had a pack of beagles. I never really went, well, I never went at all myself, but there were some kids that used to go, "Bit, what are you doing this weekend?" "Oh, I'm popping into York to see my girlfriend." "What are you doing?" "I'm going beagling." "You're going wattling?" "I'm going beagling." We had a pack of beagles. I'm sure we had a pack of, I might have to check that. I'm pretty sure we had a pack of beagles. That's how posh my school was. So the idea of not having access to the arts, we had a symphony orchestra. It was incredible. I sometimes think people don't know the difference between an education like mine and a normal or ordinary education, regardless of the value judgments or the Labour plans to put VAT on school fees. I mean, off the charts privileged, unbelievably privileged. And the idea that I'd be the same person, or I'd have the same career or the same outlook on life now at 51 if I hadn't had those sort of experiences between the ages of 13 and 18, it's just ridiculous. And it's not earned, it's not justified, it's not, well, I deserve it because my parents worked hard. It's stupid. It's stupidly unfair. And now you see that the gap is getting richer, getting bigger rather. So you're more likely now, your children are more likely to have access to the arts if they go to a school like mine, even more likely now in 2023 than they were when I was at school in 1988. It's insane. So if you're a teacher, answer this question. Ready? Is it deliberate? 0345 6060 973. If you've got a link with the education system, particularly from the arts sector, are they doing it on purpose? And if they are, why are they? Because you know my theory about fascism and empathy. I share it with you quite a lot. The best enemy of fascism or hard right politics is empathy. Because you can't encourage people to hate refugees or single mothers or the unemployed or people using food banks if you've got empathy. You know, and nobody with empathy would come out with that bill that 30p Lee came out with about food banks and nurses, while simultaneously being silent about Boris Johnson's financial management skills being so great that he needed an £800,000 loan facilitated by a bloke that he subsequently put in the chairmanship of the BBC. I mean, it's breathtakingly daft and boneheaded. So that is what happens when you have no empathy. You can't imagine what it's like to be somebody else. And books and music and theatre and drama teach you what it's like to be somebody else. On the refugee front, if you were to read Gulwali Pasaleh's book about his experiences of coming here from Afghanistan, you'd find it very hard to sustain the sort of attitudes that Suella Braverman wants you to sustain and publicly talks about. If you follow the story of my friend Wahid Aryan, who's a doctor up in Cheshire now, you'd find it very hard to sustain the view of refugees that Suella Braverman wants you to sustain. That's empathy. That's teaching you empathy. They are real life stories, but there are, of course, fictional equivalents. That's a very niche tweet, that, because that's just up the road from my mum's. Wolverley High School had a dry ski slope, James. I never got my head around that. How did that happen? This isn't a phone-in. We can't have a phone-in on why Wolverley High School had a dry ski slope in the 1980s, but I'm pretty sure it did. Funny old world. Classical music is becoming the preserve of private schools is one headline that's been published recently. So is it deliberate? 0345 6060 973. If so, why? But you know how this programme works, or this bit of this programme works by now. Tell me, or rather tell everybody listening, why it matters. What we're going to lose. Because, listen, some people won't have been lucky enough to be exposed to the arts at school. But I find that idea, you know the phrase that boils my blood more than almost any other, isn't it? It's not for the likes of you. Or rather, actually, the phrase that boils my blood more than almost any other is it's not for the likes of us. The idea that you pass on to your children, the idea that some things are not for the likes of you, some jobs that, oh no, that's not for the likes of us, some experiences. It's what Dominic Raab said to Angela Rayner. Opera, it's not for the likes of you, you chippy peasant. He didn't say that second bit out loud. What do we lose Is it deliberate? 0345 6060 973. Why are they doing it? 0345 6060 973. And if 40%, the number of students taking GCSEs in the arts has fallen by 40%, what do we lose? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 19 minutes after 12. 40% drop in the number of students taking arts GCSEs. Is it deliberate? Why are they doing it? And what will we lose? Liz is in Benfleet. Liz, what would you like to say?
Hi there.
Hello, Liz.
So I am an ex-primary school teacher, and at my old job, so I now work in a secondary school, but at my old job, they did literally just drop all art teaching. There was no music lessons for my students. It was lunchtime. Sorry about the beep.
Is that the bell? Is that the beep at school?
Yeah, to tell us
Fantastic.
it's lunchtime.
That's all right. Is it finished now?
Yeah.
How long have you got?
Oh, what, lunchtime? No, it started.
No, I meant the beeping.
The beeping stopped, yeah.
Yeah. How long have you got for lunch? An hour?
50 minutes.
What are you having today? Do you know? It's Tuesday.
No, I don't eat from the school
You don't go to
canteen.
the school canteen, do you?
Oh, no, I used to go on a Wednesday.
Why? What's on Wednesday? Pizza?
No, roast dinner.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
But orchestra is on the same day as that Wednesday, so now I don't, because I go and play clarinet instead in the orchestra.
And is it a teacher-pupil orchestra? Does it have teachers and pupils?
Yeah.
in it? How lovely.
Yeah, I'm in it. I don't run it.
No, fine. That's all right. I just enjoy. I like the idea. That's lovely. It's costs, right? At the first glance, you were abolishing the music, but it can't just. There must be more to it.
It's not cost. It is an emphasis on raising English, maths and science attainment in our schools.
Right.
They want the academic achievement, the big 8 subjects and the comparison tables and all of that stuff. We need to do better in the academic. So you go into secondary school, academic. You choose your options. When you go into year 9, you do your GCSEs. Focus on the academics. Parents don't want you doing arts and creative stuff because there's no money in it. And you go off to university because you have to go to university because to be successful, you have to have a university education. And so you want a career in an academic field. And now we've lost our ability for creative thinking. There are no creative solutions to any of the problems that we're facing. We have got such a skills shortage in this country for they call it unskilled professions, but they're differently skilled professions.
Yes, I prefer that phrase. It's a very odd. When did it start? I don't know how long you've been a teacher, but can you was it Michael Gove? He gets the blame for a lot of things, I think, quite rightly.
I mean, that was awful. I don't know when it started. I have been teaching for 6 years now. And it had already started.
No, definitely not on your watch then. I mean, but what about this? So this is a sensible suggestion from Icky, who's in Hackney. You don't need a GCSE to create art. Maybe children are realising that, but it's not.
But how do children know what they can
and can't
do? How do they know what they can explore? Unless they're given paper, unless they're given pens, unless they're given digital platforms, unless they're given paint, unless they're given these things and given the time and the space to explore and create, okay, fine, don't get a GCSE in it. We don't get GCSEs in PE, but we still are given time and space.
Because it's important to your overall human development. I mean, you sound like a great teacher. What I'm getting from you, though, is yes, it is deliberate, but it's not necessarily sinister. They might have made a mistake by accident.
Yeah, I think it's incompetence.
Yeah, it's not Dominic Raab telling Angela Rayner that people like her shouldn't be going to the opera. It's not that.
No, I don't think they're trying to discourage people from certain things in society.
Right.
I think they are trying to prioritise, and it is sheer incompetence because they don't realise how beneficial. I mean, like you were saying,
it's so silly.
So beneficial to students. I mean, the amount of students who can improve their maths ability through dance and music.
I was about to say that, but I thought you'd laugh at me. I know a teenager who got better at maths as a consequence of studying music.
Yes, and I love dance, I love music, and I love maths.
Well, that's a nice set. And your school obviously is resisting the urge because you've got an orchestra, so the music kids have got access to music there.
Our GCSE option blocks have just come out, and it is clear to see that academic subjects are doing better in terms of the number of children wanting and choosing those subjects.
See, under my glorious rule, I think I'd make one. Sorry,
photography at our school.
Oh yeah, cool.
Which is fairly popular. We have hair and beauty. We have music and music technology, so the music production stuff.
Cool.
So yeah, we have a range of different creative arts, dance and drama. Obviously, we have a Lambda program for people who are taking it for GCSE. And even if you're doing drama outside of school, you can still come in and get your qualification. So yeah, we're trying to keep it going, but they are smaller classes.
They are shrinking. Well, it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? Because the more that the priorities kick in, and perhaps the mistaken belief in what is required and what is most likely to propel you outside of school, after school, the more that you're likely to choose a subject that reflects those priorities, those imposed priorities, rather than either your natural abilities or what might be best for you. I'd make it compulsory. Would that work? Like every GCSE, is it 9 they do now, roughly?
Oh, it varies massively. Right. I don't know how many are compulsory. I think it might be 8, but I mean, no,
you have to choose one.
Different people do, yeah.
You have to choose one that is an arts subject. You have to choose one of
my GCSEs. I had to choose one art subject, and I chose art.
Yeah.
And then I dropped it so I could do triple science instead.
You're not normal, are you, Liz?
Well, I dropped art because every time I went into the classroom, it was like, oh, paint this in the style of George O'Keeffe, paint this in the style of Picasso, and I'm just like, I'm not a photocopier.
No. Well, you may have just undermined your whole call.
No,
you have at the end there. You've just made an incredibly strong case for not studying art at the end there.
No, it is about being given the time and the space to be creative.
And that's less important than
qualification.
Yes, no, you're right. You're right. I get it. PE is protected in law. So all you do is protect some of this other stuff in law as well. But art, maybe not art, because some people I was never any good at art at all. At all. And I'm like one of those people who music teachers say, oh, anyone can sing. I can teach anyone to sing. So, well, anyone can learn to do art. It's just not true. Thank you, Liz. That was a lovely start. Deliberate but not sinister. I always prefer that. Sinister there's so much sinister out there. Deliberate but not sinister. Michael's in East Kilbride. I bet things are different in Scotland. Whenever we have conversations like this, someone rings me up and says, things are different in Scotland, James.
Yeah, well, there's a bit of that, I have to say.
Yes.
I'm a teacher, a secondary teacher, kind of pupil support, but in a secondary school. And in the last sort of 10 years, I think the direction of travel between Scotland and England in the education system's huge. You know, with Michael Gove, etc. You've gone down that science, maths, academic route completely, whereas in Scotland we're, you know, it's not perfect by any means, but there's certainly a lot more money.
Why does it have to be either or? That's the thing I don't really understand. That's a conscious decision, isn't it? To make it, we pursue one at the expense of the other. Whereas, since the Greeks, the idea of a broader education being better has been baked in.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm more on the sinister side. I see the kind of. The idea of any funding for creative arts or, rubbishing these courses, it's part of the culture wars in a sense.
Do you think it is?
Yeah, I definitely do. If you're, it's easy to slag off kind of arts, any money going into arts, and yet economically it makes sense as well. Which
of course it does. Yeah, so if we create a population that is less nuanced,
anti-intellectual.
Anti-intellectual. It's a key part, isn't it? Historically, anti-intellectual. I mean, if not anti-intellectual, then unintellectual, unimaginative. I don't know. It's well, that's 1-1 then, isn't it? We've got deliberate but sinister and deliberate but not sinister. I think I'm going to lean slightly towards you, Michael. Shireen is in Greenwich. Shireen, what would you like to say?
Hello, hi.
Hello.
I'm going with deliberate. Sinister.
Yeah, go on.
So I've been a teacher for 16 years now. I'm also a senior leader.
Right.
You will have seen the change. a few years ago when I was training to be a teacher, if you was going to be a design technology teacher, they were even offering a grant, and every student had to pick an artsy subject, whether that be arts, design, technology, something.
Yes.
Now with the EBAC, we're leaning towards what they're saying is STEM. So, we're encouraging maths and science and all of these technology-based subjects, but we're not encouraging technology. We're not encouraging the hands-on subjects. Kids are actively, so I work in secondary schools, being dissuaded from those practical kind of subjects. And when you have those practical subjects, all of a sudden you have class limitations. So, you get a GCSE group of 16 kids and you get told that's not enough, whereas computer science might have 16 children, but they'll get computer science because that is where we're going. It's going a bit more technological.
Why is it? Why?
EBAC helps your Progress 8 scores, so it helps you look better.
You're going to have to translate that.
So your EBAC subjects, they're your science, your history, geography, it's your set subjects that the government prefer, and they base judgments based on schools on your Progress 8 scores. So how
English language or English literature, maths, double science, or biology, chemistry and physics, history or geography and a language. So there it is.
Exactly.
So there's no room. There's no room. Okay, final question. What do we lose?
We lose the skills. We lose the skills that we say we need in the workforce. We lose the skills that we obtain from other countries outside. And so then when students are progressing, we are now going into extra university fees because they're picking subjects that they don't necessarily really understand or like and that don't actually lead them into the workforce. It doesn't actually help our market. It doesn't help our industries. So we're losing our skills that we've cut for many, many years, and then we're acting surprised as to why. And teachers.
Yeah.
Because teachers are being squeezed too. Teachers, if you're a DT teacher and you don't have that subject, you can then, go ahead and teach a period of science a week, and you can go ahead and teach something else.
It's a strange old setup.
So you lose your skilled teachers too.
Yeah, it's a strange old setup. So I see why you say deliberate but sinister. It's not quite as sinister as it could be, because the original calculation is that this will create a more. I don't think they're trying to kill empathy under your analysis, are they?
No. I think they're not necessarily understanding the importance of all of the subjects.
Yeah.
And, it's another trend, isn't it? So when something happens and they follow a trend, they think, we need all of these subjects and we need the kids to do this.
Yeah.
And then a trend will come and they'll change their mind, like food technology. That is something that all students do have to do. Yeah. Granted, it's very minimal. Okay. They only have to do a few hours of it through Key Stage 3, but it's something that they do have to do legally, like PE.
Yeah.
And that was in response to, the growing obesity rates and things like that.
It's not making much difference. I'm not saying that glibly or facetiously, because the answer would be, of course, they should be doing more of that, because the obesity situation is not really improving much. In fact, the latest story we touched on last week, I saw it got picked up elsewhere later in the week, was about our children being shorter than their peers in other countries because of the quality of nutrition, the poor quality of nutrition. Shireen, what a great call. Made me late for the news. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's only 5-1 is the time. Do you remember Matt Hancock? Was it Matt Hancock? He used to appear on the telly a lot on Cry. He's been giving evidence to the COVID inquiry, and James Goodison has been watching it so that you don't have to. What have you taken away so far, James?
So Matt Hancock has been speaking for coming up to 2.5 hours now, James, as part of this, giving evidence. And just to be clear, this inquiry is obviously very wide-ranging. It's going across many, many years. The specific area at the moment that's being focused on is pandemic preparedness. So what kind of state were we in prior to COVID, rather than the government's test and trace, lockdowns, etc. All of that is still to come. Now, Matt Hancock became Health Secretary in 2018, July 2018. So he had 18 months in the role effectively prior to COVID actually happening. And he was asked really about sort of, when you got into the job, what did you learn about the preparedness for pandemics? He was saying, well, look, on day one, I read a briefing about it. I asked for more information about emergency preparedness and health protection on day one. Now, throughout this inquiry, as you can imagine, they put up a lot of different documents with very long numbers as names, very complicated. They talked them through it all. The first one that came up was from something called a Department of Health and Social Care High Register Risk. And that effectively is a long document that sets out different things that could effectively impact the UK. And one of them is a major national infectious disease outbreak and pandemic flu. It was marked in very clear red as a significant issue, as of course you would expect. And Matt Hancock was effectively asked, well, when it comes to it, why weren't there any mitigations in the column in this document? And he said, well, I don't know why, but there were a lot of preparations going on for something like this happening. He outlined, though, and this was a theme of the evidence he gave, that things were being prepared, but not necessarily in the right way.
On stockpiles, I was told that we had a very significant stockpile of PPE, and we did. The problem was that it was extremely hard to get it out fast enough when the crisis hit. I was told that we were good at developing tests, and indeed we were. We developed a test in the first few days after the genetic code of COVID-19 was published. The problem was there was no plan in place to scale testing that had any that we could execute. On antivirals, we had a stockpile of antivirals for a flu, but not for a coronavirus. On vaccines, I was concerned that we weren't in a strong enough position because we were reliant on manufacturing vaccines overseas. And I thought that in a pandemic scenario, force majeure would mean it would be hard to get hold of vaccine doses if they were physically manufactured overseas, no matter what our contracts said. And so I insisted that we pushed on domestic manufacture.
Now, he's being asked the questions by Hugo Keith, KC, and there was sort of an hour-long sort of period, both before and after a short break, where really the focus was on how much resource was taken away from pandemic preparedness because of Brexit planning.
Well, no-deal Brexit planning.
There was sort of two parts to it. The sort of pandemic flu readiness board that was looking at a no-deal Brexit, but also there was a memo sent from the department to Professor Sir Chris Whitty showing that pandemic readiness work had been paused. Here's what Matt Hancock had to say about that.
It was a policy decision. I would query whether it had great significance. As you can see from the numbers on this page, the numbers of people working in this area, the numbers of movement is small. And my second observation is that this work was following the wrong approach, and I'm not sure it would have been any use in the pandemic. That's my judgment from having been the man in the person in the hot seat when the pandemic struck.
Now, in the past, during evidence being given in this inquiry, James, we heard that 70 staff were seconded to make sure that supplies of drugs could continue after Brexit. And Oliver Dowden, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, said that actually this Brexit experience where, staff from different departments were pulled to work on it actually made us so-called match fit for COVID because it allowed all of the staff to work together in closer operation.
Did you say that to the inquiry or in a different
earlier
context?
Into the inquiry? Now, Matt Hancock also told the inquiry, he was asking about the World Health Organization, and effectively he was saying that the UK had been told that the UK was well prepared. The World Health Organization saying that.
Yeah, I remember reporting that we had a really good bill of health on that front.
And you can just hear from the first clip we played about sort of the amount of detail and planning that went in to it. But what was interesting is when you heard from Jeremy Hunt last week or so, where he was talking about how the approach was effectively towards the wrong virus, the focus was on flu. Matt Hancock went a bit further than that and said, well, the approach was wrong, but also the doctrine was wrong, that the plan was effectively based on the impact and the fallout and countering that, rather than stopping the spread of the virus in the first place. And throughout all of this, watching all of this, was sitting at the back were members of the COVID-19 bereaved families for justice, who have pretty much been at the inquiry every single day. And during this specific answer about the preparedness, Matt Hancock looked at them directly and apologised.
Because of these, this huge error in the doctrine that the UK, and by the way, the whole Western world had, in how to tackle a pandemic, and that flawed doctrine underpinned many of the problems that made it extremely difficult to respond. And if I may say so, I am profoundly sorry for the impact that had I'm profoundly sorry for each death that has occurred.
Now, this has been going on for quite a while, this evidence. And even when I, come downstairs to talk to you, there's a few other lines just worth reporting that I'll rattle through. Firstly, a claim from Matt Hancock that the UK came, I'm quoting here, extremely close within hours of running out of medicines for intensive care during the pandemic. He said it wasn't widely reported at the time. Also was asked about the initial sort of response with lockdowns and Wuhan and things like that. He said that he had to overrule initial advice not to quarantine people who had been flown back to the UK from Wuhan in China. He said it's madness. And the final thing worth noting is that lockdowns are, quoting here, it is the single most important thing we can learn as a country. Now, that sort of discussion will obviously become more notable when we move on to that other part of the next module when we talk about lockdowns and other such things. But of course, it is notably significant words from Matt Hancock throughout this morning, James.
James Goodison, thank you. And do we have any idea how much longer Hancock's going to be there for?
I think he's wrapping up at 1.
Wrapping up at 1, just like me. Many thanks. It is 12:42. Back to the question of arts and the importance of them, and whether or not it's deliberate or accidental that the increasing numbers of British students don't seem to have access to either. Paul is in Carcassonne, a beautiful French city. Paul, what would you like to say?
I'm just recovering from. I'm almost in tears listening to Mr. Hancock's explanation, which is pretty amazing and actually pathetic.
Anyway. No, fair enough, mate. Fair enough.
The question about the arts. The arts have the way the arts have been cut over the last, definitely over the last 8 or 9 years. It's been to the total detriment of, say, education in England. I speak as an ex-head teacher of a special school, I did a fine arts degree.
Why are they doing it? Why do you think they've done it, Paul? What would I don't mean your analysis. I mean theirs. Why would they say they had done it?
I think I just think they haven't really worked out what education means.
Right.
I think education has got to be a holistic.
But this is your analysis, isn't it?
Yeah, this is my analysis.
Why do you think they? I mean, why did they do it in their own minds? Do you think?
I'm at a loss for
fair enough.
Actually.
No, fair enough.
I think it's just been an assumption that the arts, in inverted commas, is for people who have got a good education and not for the masses.
So you go for that then? You go for the deliberate and sinister? Because I don't want to believe that. Even if people like Dominic Raab stand up and tell Angela Rayner she's got no business going to the opera, you don't want to believe that they've tried to introduce. I struggle to believe that they want to rejig the curriculum to exclude all children who aren't going to private school, which is 90-odd% of school children, from access to arts GCSEs.
Yeah, I just don't understand it.
No, fair enough.
I mean, I just do not understand how they can possibly think an education can be so
prescriptive,
slanted to the academic.
What role do these in a special school in particular? You mentioned you were head of a special needs school.
Yeah.
What role do the arts play in those sort of classrooms?
I can only talk for my own school.
Of course.
No, not for my own school. There were many special schools I knew where the arts were absolutely fundamental to what we were trying to do, because lots of children with learning difficulties were entered schools which, from mainstream, were told they couldn't do, their reading was poor, their mathematical skills were poor. When they came into my special school, I thought, well, yes, that's really, really important that we deal with that. Try to deal with those deficiencies. However, the things that many children with those difficulties can really achieve for their own personal benefit are the arts.
Of course, and so if you like, the soft advantages, the idea, the sense of achievement, which isn't necessarily going to translate onto a graph or onto a league table. I hadn't thought of it like that. Thank you, Paul. I'm going to, after this, Wendell Pierce is the guest on this week's Full Disclosure. It hadn't actually occurred to me when we started this conversation that some of the stuff he was talking about having access to when growing up in New Orleans. You'll know Wendell from The Wire and from Suits, in which he played Meghan Markle's father. I made a conscious decision not to talk about that in the entire interview. So if you're thinking of tuning in just for that, then I'm afraid I'm going to leave you disappointed. But he's currently in Jack Ryan. He's a brilliant actor, but also a fascinating man. And he had some really interesting things to say in this field, which I'd forgotten was so relevant to the conversation we're having now. So I'll play you a bit of that after this.
Leading Britain's Conversation, LBC, with James O'Brien.
It is 10 to 1. James, I listened to your Steve Coogan podcast last night, and I think that touched on this subject as well. It's an astonishing body of work now, the Full Disclosure Archive. It really is. You can access all of them, every single one, and they're all free. I can't believe they're free. I personally, if I had my way, we'd be charging for them. Not a lot, just 50p each. And then, I'd be laughing. But there's loads of them. You can find them all at the Global Player or indeed wherever you get your podcasts. But an astonishing array of people. We went all the way to his house to do the Steve Coogan, a lovely bloke. And the subject that Paul suggests that we talked about a bit, almost certainly, would be access to the arts for people from less privileged backgrounds or just from normal backgrounds, people who aren't going to private schools. Wendell Pierce, star of The Wire, star of Suits, star of Jack Ryan. He's been in loads of stuff. I just loved this interview. I didn't realise how much it was going to veer. A big part of his decision to become an actor happened in London. He came on a school trip from New Orleans and saw Kate Nelligan in As You Like It at the RSC in Stratford and thought to himself, it can be a job this. He hadn't realised. Saw Yul Brynner in The King and I at the London Palladium. I love it, these conversations. And did we get the clip? Does he do some of the jazz in the class? Because then he started showing... Well, anyway, why am I describing it to you when you're about to listen to it? Honestly, what an amateur. I need to know a little bit more about New Orleans. As I'm sure you're aware, Wendell, that the British perception of America is almost always skewed. We're not really conscious of it being 50 different, places.
Right.
I don't know what it is about New Orleans that is so special or what role that would have played in giving you a sense that you could go anywhere and do anything.
Oh, it played a major role.
I thought it might have.
Because New Orleans culture is that... it's the best of the American aesthetic. It's the fact that duality that you were talking about. It tells you in everything that we do that the two can coexist, that you have to be aware of the other, but you have to be able to be malleable and ever-changing and amorphic, because freedom within form. Literally, New Orleans is known for jazz music, which is the oom-pa-pa of European brass instruments with the African six, and it turns into jazz, right? The two coexisting. Then also the trading of fours, me singing a solo and you singing a solo. The fact that there's the form of the chords, form of the chords themselves, of the structure of the song, but I say, hey, James, play a solo, man. Within that, freedom within form, actually a better manifestation of the American aesthetic than what was happening at the time, right? We are a nation of laws, but you have the right to be free, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Taught to them by enslaved Africans on Congo Square who found their creative freedom and created jazz before they had their physical freedom.
Gosh.
Right? So just think about that. So it shows you the paradox of America, and then also the very best of the American aesthetic in the form of this music. And making a way out of no way then becomes it's exemplified in that, which is at the basis of the African American ability to survive the torturous centuries of oppression, finding a way, making a way out of no way, being malleable, ever-changing, improvisational, singing work songs that are actually helping, while you think you are picking cotton or cutting cane, you are actually helping some brothers and sisters get out of there and go free, right? Giving you a warning that someone's coming. Yes. Now's the time to run, you know?
Yeah.
So
wow.
Using the best of that improvisation, it's manifested in New Orleans culture. Our food, taking the scraps from the table, burning some flour and oil and building that into a stew that is known around the world as gumbo, right? Taking that and a mud bug that nobody wants to deal with and turn it into crawfish étouffée, right? Taking the influences of the French and the German and the African and Native American there and putting it into dishes like jambalaya, which I like to call Creole paella. You know, that's really what it is, the influence of the Spanish. And then all of our étouffées and gravies or sauces of the French, you know. So New Orleans culture made me who I am.
Clearly.
And a man who is ever-changing, malleable, able to improvise, and be as diverse as possible in my career. Theater, television, and film, and travel as much as I love to do.
It sounds like an inevitable destiny when you put it in that context. It was such a joy. It really was. I know I say that about almost all my full disclosures, but but Tony, you absolute muppet. Full disclosures are free, he writes. I've never had one. I thought I'd never heard one because I thought it was charged for. It's a podcast. No one charged. Does anyone charge for podcasts? Does anyone charge for podcasts? If they do, I might call their agent. No, Tony, they're all free, and there are thousands of them on the Global Player where you can download all sorts of things. In fact, I'll probably be giving you the spiel in about 2 minutes' time. First, though, Anne-Marie is in Kazanlak in Bulgaria. Hello.
Hello, James.
Hello, Bulgaria.
It's me again.
Hello. What have you got? I haven't got long. Sheila's limbering up.
Very quickly. Teaching arts in schools is a revolutionary act.
It is,
the reason is because it teaches people to be open, to be empathetic. It changes their life view. And I was thinking of Charles Dickens, the opening line of Hard Times, where he talks about facts and only facts, that's all that'll serve them.
Oh, yes.
And it's a case... So it's a very Victorian utilitarian idea. What they're introducing is to make them fit for work, but nothing else.
So you've gone for deliberate and very sinister as your analysis.
Because I believe that this is it's true. The idea is that the James song. I could live if I hadn't seen such riches. I could live with being poor. If you cut off art and music and galleries and beautiful poetry and all those ideas and all that philosophy and give you a world view rather than a very insular, all I need to do is to get me O level so that I can go to work.
You are absolutely knocking it out of the park. Tim Booth, I hope, will be honoured. To have heard his lyrics cited in defence of such a powerful thesis. Have you heard the new album? Have you heard that they've put all the...
Not yet, no, not yet.
They've put it all to orchestral music, appropriately enough.
Oh, there you go.
Given what we've been talking about over the last hour.
It's this idea, you deny people a reason to live. It's not just... You're not on this planet just to work. You should be open to everything that's beautiful. It gives you just a reason to live.
There it is. I'm going to give you that first line because you've nailed it, actually. That facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. You can only form the mind of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. And that does appear to be the conservative approach to arts in schools. Thank you, Anne-Marie. What a lovely way to finish. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player or on the Whole Show podcast. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcasts. I told you. Download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, of course, and now it's time for Sheila Folk. 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 Now it's